The bell above the door of the local branch of Rosewood Bank jingled as Marcus stepped inside. It was a quiet afternoon, the kind of day when everything felt like it was moving at half speed. Marcus, however, felt the opposite. His heart raced, his palms were clammy, and he couldn't quite figure out why. He wasn't new to this, depositing money was something he did almost every week. But today felt different. Maybe it was because of the pocketful of crumpled dollar bills in his hands that he'd saved from his part-time job. Or maybe it was the way he'd felt out of place in his predominantly white high school, where he was often the only black kid in the room. He'd gotten used to that feeling of being different, but it never made it easier. "Hi, how can I help you today?" The voice that snapped Marcus out of his spiraling thoughts was sharp, almost condescending. He glanced up at the teller behind the counter. A woman in her early 30s, her blonde hair pulled back into a tight ponytail, eyes fixed on him with a strange intensity. Jessica, according to her name tag. Marcus tried to offer a smile, but it felt awkward on his face. "I'd like to deposit this into my account," he said, his voice a little quieter than he'd intended. He placed the crumpled bills on the counter, careful not to let them scatter. Jessica eyed the money, then looked back at him. Her gaze was cold, assessing, as though she were evaluating whether he had a right to be there at all. "Are you sure you have an account here?" Her words weren't harsh, but the tone was flat, devoid of any warmth. Marcus blinked, confused. He had been coming to this bank for years. His account was in good standing, and he had been here countless times before, never encountering anything like this. "Yes," he said, still trying to keep his voice steady, "I have an account." The pause was long, too long. Jessica's eyes scanned his face, lingering a moment longer than was comfortable. Marcus could feel his chest tightening. He wasn't sure what it was about her that made him nervous, maybe it was her demeanor, or maybe it was the way she made him feel small, like he didn't belong. Without responding, Jessica grabbed a pen from the counter and began scribbling something on a piece of paper. The click of the pen echoed in the quiet space, adding to Marcus's unease. "Could you please provide me with your account number?" she asked, without looking up. Marcus felt a rush of frustration bubble up inside him, but he tried to push it down. "Sure," he said, fumbling with his phone to pull up the details. The minutes stretched long, each one heavier than the last. As he handed her the phone with his account number displayed, Jessica took it, not even glancing at the screen. Instead, she turned her attention back to the crumpled bills on the counter, inspecting them closely. Her lips curled slightly, not quite a smile. "This is a large sum of cash for someone your age, don't you think?" she asked, her tone now dripping with skepticism. Marcus stared at her, stunned. His stomach dropped. Large sum of cash. His savings from working weekends and occasional freelance jobs. It wasn't a fortune by any means, just a few $100s. "I've been working," he said, trying to hold back the defensive edge creeping into his voice. Jessica's gaze flickered to his worn-out shoes and the faded hoodie he wore. It was subtle, but he caught it, just a brief flicker of judgment. "Right," she replied, still not looking at him, her voice colder now. "And you're sure this isn't from?" "I don't know, some other source." She wasn't even trying to hide the disbelief in her voice. Marcus's mind raced. What was she implying? Was she accusing him of something? He was about to speak when a sudden thought cut through his frustration. Was it his skin color? Did she think he was some kind of criminal, just because he was black and standing at her counter with a few bills? His breath hitched. Was this really happening? He shook his head, forcing the words out, though they felt like they were getting stuck in his throat. "I work for this money. I'm just trying to deposit it into my account." His voice was barely a whisper, but he could feel the weight of every syllable. Jessica's eyes lifted from the money, briefly meeting his. "I'll need to check with my supervisor," she said curtly, reaching for the phone on the counter. The words hung in the air like a cold, invisible weight. Marcus stood frozen, unsure what to do next. The way she treated him, the way she looked at him, it wasn't just dismissive. It was as though he wasn't even worthy of her attention, not worthy of basic respect. His phone buzzed in his pocket. He didn't answer it, though he could tell by the ringtone that it was his mom. Veronica James. It wasn't the first time his mom had called while he was at the bank, but this time, something felt off. He knew he had to handle this situation himself, but the pressure of the moment was taking its toll. He just wanted to get this over with. Jessica picked up the phone, speaking in low tones that Marcus couldn't quite hear. He wasn't sure if he was imagining it, but it seemed like she was still talking about him, not to him. Just as Marcus was about to speak again, the door to the bank opened with a soft chime, and a tall woman in a sleek suit stepped inside. Veronica. Marcus recognized her immediately. Her presence was undeniable, like the calm after a storm. The moment his mother entered the bank, everything changed. The room seemed to pause, as if the air itself had thickened with unspoken recognition. Jessica, still holding the phone to her ear, suddenly straightened up, her face flickering with discomfort. Veronica moved swiftly, purposefully, her high heels clicking against the polished floor as she approached the counter. Her sharp eyes took in the scene in a heartbeat. "Is there a problem here?" she asked, her voice smooth and authoritative. There was no mistaking it, this was a woman who was used to being in control, used to getting answers. Marcus's breath caught in his throat. He hadn't expected his mom to show up, but she wasn't just any mom. Veronica James was the CEO of one of the most successful tech companies in the country. Her influence stretched far beyond boardrooms, and she was a force to be reckoned with in any room she entered. Jessica stood frozen, her mouth opening and closing like she was struggling to find the right words. Marcus could see the recognition in her eyes now, the realization that she had just been treating the son of one of the most powerful women in business like a common criminal. The tension in the air was palpable. What had started as an awkward encounter had turned into something much bigger than either of them could have anticipated. Veronica turned her gaze to Marcus, her eyes softening just for a moment. "Marcus," she said, her tone calm yet filled with concern. "What happened here?" Marcus's heart thudded in his chest. He didn't even know where to begin. Jessica was still standing there, her face pale, the phone forgotten in her hand. The power dynamic in the room had shifted, and for the first time, Marcus felt like he wasn't the one on trial. He wasn't the only one being judged anymore. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? As the tension in the bank hung thick in the air, Marcus couldn't help but feel like he was suffocating. His mother was here, and while it should have been a relief, it only made everything feel heavier. Veronica James was an intimidating figure, successful, respected, a woman who had built an empire from the ground up. She was not the kind of person you expected to show up at a small-town bank, and certainly not for a moment like this. Yet, here she was, her presence instantly shifting the balance of the room. But for Marcus, this wasn't just about what happened at the bank. It was about everything that led up to this moment. His mother's arrival didn't erase the sting of what had just happened, nor did it make the years of his life as the only one in almost every room he'd ever been in any easier. Marcus had never been a stranger to the weight of his skin. He wasn't new to the feeling of being treated like he didn't belong, even though he had every right to be wherever he was. Growing up in a predominantly white neighborhood wasn't easy. He'd often been the only black kid in his class, and when he wasn't, it didn't always feel like a victory. The few black students he knew were often quiet, isolated, or actively ignored, blending into the background in a sea of white faces. From a young age, Marcus had learned to keep his head down, stay quiet, and make himself as invisible as possible. It wasn't that he didn't want to stand out. It was more that he'd learned early on that being noticed often meant being singled out. In a school where the history of black excellence wasn't a part of the curriculum, Marcus had to make his own way, often feeling like an outsider even when surrounded by his classmates. But there was one thing Marcus had learned from his mother: perseverance. Veronica had shown him time and time again that no matter what obstacles stood in your way, it was always about how you handled them. She never allowed herself to be the token or the exception. She was always the leader, the one who had to prove herself not just once, but continuously. From a young age, Veronica had to fight to be heard in a world that often didn't listen to women, let alone women of color. Veronica had risen through the ranks in the corporate world, facing countless setbacks, dismissals, and biases along the way. There were times when she was the only woman in the room, the only black woman at the table, and the only voice standing up for change. And yet, through sheer grit and determination, Veronica had become the CEO of a tech giant that had revolutionized the way people worked. It wasn't just about business for Veronica, though. She had always been adamant about being a good mother, about ensuring that Marcus had the tools he needed to succeed in a world that would try to put him in a box. Still, despite her wealth and success, she was also a reminder that the fight was never truly over. No matter how far she'd come, Veronica's struggles were far from behind her. Marcus had seen his mother work tirelessly, and he had watched her weather storms that he couldn't even imagine. Yet, despite the challenges, Veronica had always been there for him, supporting him in ways that only a mother could. But she couldn't protect him from everything. She couldn't shield him from the uncomfortable truth that, no matter how much success he achieved, people would always see him first for the color of his skin. Marcus had tried, over the years, to prove that he was more than just a black kid. He was an individual, a person with dreams, with ambition, and with a future. But the world often wasn't so kind in how it saw him. No matter how hard he worked at his part-time job or how well he did in school, there was always that moment, the look, the subtle questioning, the doubt in someone's eyes that suggested he didn't belong. Growing up with Veronica had certainly given Marcus advantages many people would never know, but it had also come with a heavy burden. He was expected to succeed, not just for himself, but for his mother. Her achievements had set a high bar, and Marcus had always felt like he was chasing her shadow. It was a feeling he could never shake, no matter how much he tried to carve his own path. As Marcus grew older, he learned to balance the internal conflict of being proud of his mother's success while also feeling like he had to carve out his own identity. He'd chosen to stay in his small town, even as others from his school moved away to bigger cities, because there was a comfort in the familiar, even if it didn't always feel welcoming. But there were times, like today, when it became too much to handle, the moments when people saw the color of his skin and treated him like he didn't belong. He was just a kid trying to deposit money from his job, but the way Jessica had treated him made him feel like a criminal. "Are you okay, Marcus?" Veronica's voice pulled him back to the present as she stood beside him. Her concern was evident, but there was a hint of something else in her eyes, something he'd never seen before. Marcus swallowed hard, his throat tight. He looked up at his mother, whose face, even in the middle of the bank, remained calm and composed. She was always like that, even when the world seemed to be spinning out of control. Veronica's strength had been both a blessing and a curse for Marcus. It was a blessing because she had shown him the way forward, but a curse because he often felt like he could never live up to her example. "I'm fine," Marcus muttered, his voice betraying the frustration that had been building up inside him. "No, you're not," Veronica said softly, her gaze softening as she placed a hand on his shoulder. "This is why I'm here. Let's take care of this." Marcus nodded silently, feeling a mix of relief and guilt. He wasn't used to relying on anyone, least of all his mother. He had always tried to keep his problems to himself, handling them the best he could. But today, it seemed like the weight of everything had finally cracked through. And now, with Veronica beside him, he felt like he wasn't alone in this fight, but he also felt the weight of her expectations. The words of the bank employee, Jessica, echoed in his mind. "Are you sure you have an account here?" It wasn't just about the deposit. It was about the subtle prejudice that had seeped into the way people treated him. How could someone so casually question his legitimacy in a space where he was supposed to be treated just like anyone else? Marcus could feel the anger bubbling up inside him, but there was something else, something deeper. A realization that this wasn't just about him. This was bigger than one isolated incident. This was about systemic injustice. It was about the way society viewed people like him. And for the first time, Marcus felt the spark of determination ignite inside him. Veronica noticed the shift in her son's demeanor. She knew that look in his eyes. It was the same look she had seen in herself countless times when she was younger, the look that came before a fight. A fight not just to prove a point, but to change something, even if it was just a small part of the world. "Let's go home," Veronica said, her voice steady and strong. Marcus nodded, knowing that this moment wasn't over. It was just beginning. The drive home from Rosewood Bank was silent, save for the hum of the car's engine and the soft sound of tires against the smooth pavement. Marcus sat in the passenger seat, his eyes focused on the passing trees and streetlights, but his mind was a whirlwind of thoughts he couldn't quiet. The feeling of being judged, of being questioned for simply existing, had gnawed at him since the moment Jessica had treated him with that condescending tone. His mom, Veronica, kept her gaze firmly on the road ahead, her hands steady on the steering wheel, but Marcus could feel the tension between them. It wasn't that she was angry, it was more like a quiet, unspoken understanding. She knew that something had shaken him. She always knew. But he wasn't sure how to put it into words. The bank incident wasn't the first time he had been made to feel less than. It had happened before, in school, in stores, in places where he thought he could be just like everyone else. But now, it was more than just the usual everyday ignorance, it felt intentional. It felt like something deeper, something that couldn't be swept aside with the usual deflections or "it's just how people are" excuses. Marcus had grown used to the microaggressions. The side glances when he entered a room. The way people would grip their bags tighter when he walked past. The whispers and the looks, the quiet assumptions. He'd internalized all of it, telling himself it was just how things were. But today had felt different. "You don't have to stay quiet about this, Marcus," Veronica's voice broke through his thoughts. It was gentle, but firm. "I know it's hard to speak up, especially when you're not sure how to explain what you're feeling. But don't ever feel like you have to let this slide." Marcus turned to look at her, his throat tightening. He could see the concern in her eyes, the same eyes that had always been there for him, that had seen him through everything, even the difficult moments. But there was something else in her gaze, a quiet fire that Marcus rarely saw. It was the fire that had helped her rise to the top of her field. The same fire that had made her fight to be heard when no one wanted to listen. "I don't know what to say," Marcus muttered, staring out of the window again. "It's like every time I think I've gotten past it, something else happens. And I feel stupid for feeling this way. Maybe it's just me. Maybe I'm overreacting." Veronica let out a soft sigh, the kind that carried both wisdom and understanding. "You're not overreacting. What you're feeling is real. And I'm proud of you for recognizing it. The hardest part is always acknowledging the pain, especially when it comes from people who are supposed to treat you like everyone else. But I promise you, it's not just you. It's not just about one incident, it's part of a bigger pattern. One that we've seen, and that we have to fight against, even when it feels exhausting." Marcus's heart beat a little faster. "But how do I fight it, Mom? How can I make them understand? I'm just one person, and it feels like the world's against me sometimes." Veronica's voice softened as she reached over to place a hand on his. "You may feel small, but you're not alone in this. You'll never be alone. We fight these battles by raising our voices, by demanding respect, and by showing the world that we belong. It won't always be easy, but you'll always have me by your side. And one day, Marcus, you'll be able to stand up and show the world that you are who you are, without fear, without shame." For a moment, Marcus remained quiet, feeling the weight of his mother's words settle into his chest. He wanted to believe her. He wanted to feel strong, like he could take on the world and show everyone that he wasn't afraid of what they thought of him. But the truth was, he was terrified. He was terrified of being judged, of being rejected, of having everything he worked for dismissed because of the color of his skin. When they arrived home, the silence between them continued as they entered the house. Marcus dropped his backpack by the door and made his way to the kitchen, where Veronica always kept a pot of coffee brewing. It was one of those little rituals they shared, sitting together after a long day and having quiet conversations over steaming mugs of coffee. But today, Marcus wasn't in the mood for small talk. He needed to process. He needed to figure out what to do next. As he grabbed a mug and poured himself some coffee, Veronica entered the room, leaning against the doorframe, her arms crossed. "You know," she said casually, "I've had my fair share of moments like what happened at the bank today." Marcus turned to face her, surprised. "You? But you're—" "Don't be fooled by the success, Marcus," Veronica interrupted, a small smile tugging at the corners of her mouth. "Just because I've made it in the corporate world doesn't mean I've escaped it. Every day, I deal with people who underestimate me, who assume I'm just a figurehead, or that I only got here because of luck. Do you know how many times people have questioned my decisions simply because I'm a woman of color?" Marcus's eyes widened as he took in her words. He had never really thought about it in that way. To him, his mom was untouchable, a force of nature. But hearing her speak so openly about her own struggles made him realize that she had been fighting battles he didn't fully understand. "But how do you do it?" Marcus asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "How do you keep going when it feels like nothing's changing?" Veronica smiled warmly, a glint of pride in her eyes. "Because I have no other choice. And because I know that every step I take, no matter how small, is a step forward for both of us. It's not just about me. It's about making things better for people like you, for people who are too often overlooked. I keep pushing because I know that by pushing, I'm helping to create a world where you don't have to fight the same fights I did." Marcus felt the weight of her words sink in. He had never really understood the full extent of what his mother had gone through to get where she was. He had always seen her as the rock, the constant in his life. But now, seeing her through his own eyes, eyes that had just encountered the sting of prejudice, it made him realize that she had been fighting her own battles all along. He took a deep breath, setting the coffee cup down on the counter. "I'm not sure I'm ready for all that," he admitted. "It feels too big. Too impossible." Veronica stepped forward, placing a hand on his shoulder. "You don't have to be ready yet. It's okay to be scared. It's okay to not have all the answers. But what I want you to remember is that you are not alone. And you will never be alone in this. Together, we'll face whatever comes next." For the first time that day, Marcus felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe he wasn't ready, but he knew that with his mother by his side, he wouldn't have to face the world alone. And that, for now, was enough to keep him going. The morning sun cast a soft, golden light over the city as Marcus woke up. His room was quiet, the kind of stillness that came only with early mornings before the world fully came to life. The events of yesterday still lingered in his mind, the way Jessica had looked at him, the dismissive tone, the way his own worth had been questioned. But alongside the lingering bitterness, there was something else now. Something subtle, but undeniably there. A spark. He had woken up feeling different. Stronger. The conversation with his mom the night before had planted something inside him, something he couldn't quite explain, but that was slowly growing, taking root. Marcus got dressed in his usual attire, a pair of jeans and a simple t-shirt. There was something comforting about the simplicity of his clothes. They were neutral, unremarkable. Like him, he thought. He never liked to stand out, always preferring to blend in, to be unnoticed. But lately, he was beginning to wonder if that was the right approach. He grabbed his bag and headed downstairs, where his mother was already at the kitchen counter, sipping on her morning coffee. Veronica looked up as he entered, a smile tugging at the corners of her lips. "Good morning, Marcus." "Morning, Mom," he replied, trying to keep his tone casual, though his mind was buzzing with thoughts. Veronica set her mug down and pushed a piece of paper toward him. I've been thinking, she said carefully. I want to help you with this, Marcus. We need to address what happened at the bank. Not just for you, but for everyone who's been through something like this. Marcus raised an eyebrow, glancing at the paper. What is this? It's a list of people I know who can help, she said. People who understand what you're going through. People who fought similar battles. They'll help guide you through this. Marcus felt a tight knot form in his stomach. He wasn't sure what to make of it. Was this what he needed? To rely on people he didn't even know? He'd always been independent, always figured things out on his own. But as he stared at the list, he began to realize something. His mom was right. He couldn't fight this battle alone. I know it's not easy, Veronica continued, her voice soft but steady. But you don't have to keep everything inside. You've been carrying this weight for too long. Now it's time to turn it into something positive. Something that can help change things. Marcus ran a hand through his hair. He hadn't been sure what to expect from his mother after the bank incident, but this was more than he had imagined. He'd expected maybe a comforting word or two, but not this level of intervention. It felt overwhelming, but also strangely empowering. Like she was giving him the tools to fight back. I don't know, Marcus muttered. It feels like such a huge thing to tackle. I'm just one person. Veronica gave him a look, one that Marcus had seen many times before. It was the look of someone who had been where he was, who had felt small, who had doubted herself, but had found a way to push through. It was the same look she had given him when he doubted his own abilities growing up. You are not just one person, she said, her voice firm. You are a young man with the ability to change lives, Marcus. You have the power to make a difference, even if you don't see it yet. I can help you, but you're the one who has to take the first step. The weight of her words settled over him. He had never thought of himself that way before. To him, he was just another teenager trying to get by, trying to figure things out. But maybe his mother saw something in him that he couldn't see yet. He picked up the piece of paper, scanning the names and numbers. There were a few names he recognized from his mother's business circles, but most were new to him. He wasn't sure what to expect, but he knew one thing, he couldn't keep living in silence. He couldn't let moments like what happened at the bank define him. I'll do it, Marcus said quietly, finally meeting his mother's eyes. Veronica's smile widened, the pride in her expression clear. I'm proud of you, Marcus. And you should be proud of yourself too. Before Marcus could respond, his phone buzzed on the kitchen table. He picked it up, glancing at the screen. It was a message from his best friend, Jamal. Yo, I saw what happened at the bank. You good? Marcus paused, his fingers hovering over the keyboard as he typed back. I'm fine. Just, trying to process it all. He stared at the message for a moment longer, wondering whether he should tell Jamal everything. But he didn't feel ready to talk about it just yet. Maybe later. For now, he just needed to figure out what to do next. His phone buzzed again, and Marcus looked down. It was a call from a number he didn't recognize. Hello? Marcus James, a smooth, professional voice asked. Yes, this is Marcus. Hi, Marcus. My name is Alicia Roberts. I'm with the Black Advocates Association. Your mother passed along your name to me. She mentioned that you might be interested in discussing some of the challenges you've been facing. Marcus felt a slight pang of surprise. He hadn't expected his mom to reach out to anyone this quickly. Yeah. I'm definitely interested. But I wasn't sure where to start. Alicia's voice was warm, and there was something comforting in the way she spoke. No problem. Let's take it one step at a time. I'd like to set up a meeting with you, Marcus, so we can talk about your experiences and how we can help you turn this into something positive. There's a lot of work to be done, but you don't have to do it alone. Marcus hesitated for a moment, but then he realized something. His mom had been right. This was bigger than just him. This was about a community, about all the people who had been overlooked, dismissed, or treated unfairly. And he wasn't going to let this moment pass him by. "Okay," he said, his voice steady now. "Let's meet." As he hung up the phone, a sense of purpose filled him, one that he hadn't felt in a long time. It wasn't just about fighting back against Jessica or any one person. It was about something much bigger. It was about standing up for himself and others like him, for anyone who had been made to feel less than. And it started now. Marcus turned to his mom, who was watching him closely. "I think I'm ready." Veronica smiled, her eyes full of pride. "I know you are." The days following Marcus's call to Alicia Roberts felt like a whirlwind. He couldn't quite believe how quickly things had begun to unfold. After their phone call, he had scheduled a meeting with Alicia and the Black Advocates Association. The thought of walking into that room, speaking to people who understood what he was going through, was both terrifying and exhilarating. For the first time in a long while, Marcus felt like he wasn't alone in his struggle. That Friday afternoon, Veronica drove him to the office of the Black Advocates Association, a modest building nestled between two taller skyscrapers in downtown. Marcus had always been intimidated by the sleek glass and steel structures that filled the heart of the city, but today, he was focused on the people inside that building, the ones who might have the answers he needed. As they pulled up, Marcus couldn't help but feel a mix of nerves and anticipation. Veronica, sensing his unease, squeezed his shoulder reassuringly. "You're doing the right thing, Marcus. You don't have to carry this burden alone anymore." "I know, Mom," he said quietly, though his voice still trembled slightly. "But what if they don't understand? What if they think I'm just complaining about nothing?" Veronica looked at him with a soft smile. "You're not complaining. You're speaking your truth. And anyone who doesn't understand that, they're the ones who need to learn." Marcus nodded, though doubt still clouded his thoughts. He was about to step into a world he had never really been a part of, an organized effort to address the discrimination and prejudice he had always been told to endure quietly. But today was different. Today, he was choosing to speak up. They walked into the building, and the lobby was bright and welcoming, with walls lined with photographs of activists, community leaders, and ordinary people who had made a difference. The receptionist smiled warmly at them. "Marcus, right? Alicia is expecting you. She's in conference room B." Marcus nodded, still unsure of what to expect. Veronica gave his hand a reassuring squeeze before they made their way down the hallway. When they entered the conference room, Alicia Roberts stood up to greet them. She was a tall woman, in her late 30s, with a calm but confident demeanor. Her smile was genuine as she extended her hand. "Marcus, it's so good to finally meet you in person. And you must be Veronica," she added, shaking Marcus's mother's hand. "I've heard a lot about you." Veronica smiled politely but said nothing, allowing the two of them to continue. Marcus's nerves were still there, but seeing Alicia's warmth helped ease some of the tension. They all sat down at the long, oval-shaped table, and Marcus immediately felt the weight of the conversation ahead of him. "So, Marcus," Alicia began, her voice steady, "I know your mom has shared a bit about your experience. But I want to hear from you. I want to understand exactly what happened at the bank, and more importantly, how it made you feel." Marcus took a deep breath, gathering his thoughts. It was difficult to put everything into words, the frustration, the confusion, the anger, but he knew he had to try. This wasn't just about one incident, it was about everything he had felt in his life as a young black man trying to navigate a world that often didn't seem to care. "I went into the bank to deposit some money," he started, his voice quiet but steady. "And when I got to the teller, the woman, Jessica, she just treated me differently. Like I was suspicious or like I didn't belong there. She was condescending, like she didn't believe I was capable of making a deposit. She asked me all these questions, like I was doing something wrong." Alicia nodded, her expression thoughtful. "How did that make you feel?" Marcus hesitated, trying to find the right words. I felt small, like I didn't matter. Like I was invisible, but also in the way at the same time. It was like she saw me, but didn't really see me. She saw my skin, and that's all she saw. Veronica's gaze softened as she placed a hand on Marcus's. That's exactly what we've been talking about. It's that feeling of being judged before you even have a chance to prove yourself. Alicia sat back, processing what Marcus had shared. It's so important that you're speaking up about this, Marcus. The thing is, when people make assumptions about you based on your skin color, they're not just affecting you. They're perpetuating a system of racism that impacts the whole community. And it's not your fault. Marcus swallowed hard, trying to absorb what Alicia was saying. He had always felt guilty for not being able to stop these things from happening. But now, in this room with Alicia and his mom, he was starting to realize that this wasn't something he was responsible for. He didn't have to carry the weight of other people's prejudices. I know it's hard, Alicia continued, but the more people speak out, the more we can begin to change this. The more we can show people like Jessica that their assumptions are wrong. You don't have to accept this. And neither do we. Marcus looked at her, the weight of her words sinking in. For the first time, he felt a sense of hope that he hadn't allowed himself to feel before. Maybe it wasn't all on him. Maybe he didn't have to fight this battle alone. Okay, Marcus said, his voice more confident now. What do we do next? Alicia smiled, her eyes lighting up with pride. Next, we make sure you're supported. You're going to need a team of people who will be there for you, to help you navigate the next steps. And then, we'll figure out how we can take action. You don't have to do this alone, Marcus. You're part of a bigger movement now. The sense of possibility in the room was palpable. Marcus felt like a weight had been lifted off his shoulders, but also like something new was beginning to take shape, a new sense of purpose, a new direction. This was bigger than one incident at the bank. It was about confronting the prejudice that had shaped his life and the lives of so many others. And it was about fighting for a future where no one would have to feel like they didn't belong. As the meeting came to a close, Alicia gave Marcus a reassuring smile. You've taken the hardest step, Marcus. You've spoken out. Now, we'll stand with you every step of the way. Walking out of the building with Veronica by his side, Marcus felt like a different person. He wasn't sure exactly where this journey would take him, but he knew one thing for sure, he wasn't going to let the world define him any longer. He was going to define himself. And with his mom and a group of people who understood him, he felt ready to face whatever came next. The following week was a blur for Marcus. He couldn't remember the last time he'd felt this driven, this alive with purpose. The conversations with Alicia and the other members of the Black Advocates Association had opened his eyes to a world of activism, community, and support he hadn't known existed. They didn't just talk about problems, they worked toward solutions. And for the first time, Marcus felt like he could be part of that solution. Alicia had given him a list of resources, groups, and contacts that could help him build the foundation of his journey. She'd also encouraged him to speak at an upcoming community rally about racial equality. The idea of standing before a crowd and sharing his story made his heart race with both fear and excitement. But as much as the idea of speaking out terrified him, he couldn't ignore the growing desire to be heard. To be seen. Not just for who he was as an individual, but as a part of something bigger than himself. He wasn't just fighting for justice for Marcus James anymore, he was fighting for all the people who had ever been marginalized, dismissed, or overlooked. That Friday evening, as Marcus sat at the kitchen table finishing his homework, Veronica walked in with a smile on her face. I've got some good news, she said, sitting down across from him. Marcus raised an eyebrow, pushing his notebook aside. What's up? I spoke with the bank, she said, a glint of determination in her eyes. I told them what happened to you, and they agreed to meet with us next week. The bank manager wants to talk with you directly. Marcus blinked, momentarily stunned. Wait, they want to meet with me? After everything that happened? Veronica nodded. They're taking this seriously, Marcus. They want to understand what happened from your perspective. And they've promised to make changes so that this doesn't happen again to anyone else. A lump formed in Marcus's throat. He wasn't sure what to feel. A part of him wanted to walk away, to tell them he didn't care about what they had to say. After all, it wasn't just one bad experience, it was years of discrimination, of microaggressions, of being made to feel less than. But there was also another part of him, the part that was growing stronger every day, that wanted to use this moment as an opportunity to demand change, not just for himself, but for everyone who had ever been in his shoes. This is important, Marcus, Veronica continued. You're not just doing this for you. You're doing this for everyone who's been treated unfairly. Marcus stared at the table for a long moment, wrestling with his emotions. He had always been a quiet person, someone who kept his thoughts to himself, letting injustices pass by without making waves. But now, things were different. He wasn't just a passive observer in his own life anymore. He was an active participant, and he had a voice that could make a difference. I'll do it, he said finally, meeting his mother's eyes. I'll meet with them. But this time, it's not just about me. It's about making sure no one else has to go through what I did. Veronica's smile widened, pride radiating from her. That's my boy. I knew you had it in you. The day of the meeting with the bank arrived faster than Marcus had anticipated. He spent the morning pacing, going over what he wanted to say, practicing his words, but nothing seemed good enough. What could he possibly say to make them understand the weight of what had happened? How could he make them realize that this wasn't just an isolated incident, but a reflection of a larger, systemic problem? Veronica, ever calm and composed, reassured him as they drove to the bank. You don't need to have all the answers, Marcus. Just speak from your heart. Tell them how you felt. That's all they need to hear. As they entered the bank, Marcus felt his nerves tightening in his chest. The lobby was calm, almost sterile, as if nothing was out of the ordinary. But to Marcus, everything felt different. This place, which had once felt so familiar and mundane, now seemed like a battleground. The very air in the room felt heavy with tension. The bank manager, a middle-aged man with a neatly pressed suit and a pleasant smile, greeted them with a handshake. His name was Mr. Davis, and his handshake felt like a symbol of business as usual. Marcus, it's good to meet you, he said warmly. I've heard a lot about your experience, and I want to hear directly from you what happened. Marcus nodded, taking a deep breath before he spoke. I came in that day to deposit some money, just like anyone else. But when I got to the counter, the teller, Jessica, she treated me like I wasn't worthy of being there. She asked me all these questions, like I was doing something wrong. And when I asked her why she was questioning me, she just brushed me off. It made me feel less than. Like I didn't belong. Mr. Davis leaned forward, his expression serious. I'm very sorry that you had that experience, Marcus. That's certainly not how we want any of our customers to feel. Marcus looked at him, his voice unwavering. It's not just about that one moment. It's about what it represents. It's about the way people like me are treated every day. We're judged before we even have a chance to prove ourselves. And it's not just at the bank. It's everywhere. Veronica, who had been silent until now, spoke up. What my son is saying is that we've all experienced this in different forms. And it needs to stop. People need to understand that we are not the problem. The problem is the assumptions they make based on the color of our skin. Mr. Davis nodded slowly, clearly absorbing the weight of their words. I hear you, and I understand your frustration. We take these concerns seriously. I'll make sure to implement some changes, additional training for our staff, perhaps even some workshops on unconscious bias. We want to ensure that every customer feels respected. Marcus felt a flicker of hope, but he wasn't about to let them off easily. And what about accountability? Will there be consequences for people who treat others like this? Because without accountability, change doesn't really happen. Mr. Davis hesitated, then met Marcus's gaze. We will be reviewing our internal policies. I can't speak to specifics right now, but I can assure you that we will be holding our employees accountable. For the first time in a long while, Marcus felt like someone was actually listening. He wasn't sure whether or not this meeting would lead to lasting change, but he knew that this conversation was a step in the right direction. It was a small victory, but victories added up. As they left the bank, Veronica turned to Marcus. You did great today, Marcus. I'm proud of you. Marcus nodded, a small smile forming on his lips. It wasn't easy, but it feels like we're starting to make a difference. He didn't know what the future would hold, but he knew one thing for sure, he wasn't going to stop speaking up. Because change wasn't just about one person. It was about all of them, together, fighting for a better tomorrow. The week after the meeting with the bank, Marcus couldn't help but feel a strange mixture of relief and uncertainty. The confrontation, if it could even be called that, had been intense. But walking out of the bank, with his mom by his side, he felt like he had finally taken control of his story. Even if nothing changed right away, he knew he had made his mark. But something surprising happened. The day after the meeting, Marcus received a phone call. It was from Alicia Roberts. Marcus, I hope you're doing well. I just wanted to check in and see how things went with the bank. I know it's a lot to process, but we've been talking about your case with the group, and there's been a lot of support. I think it's time we take things a step further. Step further? Marcus asked, sitting up straighter in his chair. He had been dreading the idea of more attention, of being thrust into the spotlight. But at the same time, he couldn't ignore the feeling that the momentum was starting to build. Yes, Alicia said, her tone excited but thoughtful. We believe that your experience could be a key part of something bigger. We're organizing a community march for racial equality, and we want you to be one of the speakers. It's not just about your personal experience, it's about showing the world that this kind of treatment, this kind of prejudice, is unacceptable. We need to bring attention to it, and you could help make that happen. Marcus's heart raced. A march? Speaking in front of a crowd of strangers, people he didn't know. The thought of it made his palms sweat, but there was another part of him, a part that had been awakened by his conversation with the bank, that felt it was his responsibility. He couldn't just sit back and hope things would get better on their own. He had to stand up. I'll do it, Marcus said, surprising himself. It was as if a switch had been flipped. He wasn't just the quiet kid anymore, the one who took things lying down. He was Marcus James, a voice for change, a voice for the future. The march was scheduled for the following Saturday, and Marcus threw himself into the preparation. Alicia and the Black Advocates Association had been working tirelessly, arranging the logistics of the event, and spreading the word throughout the community. Posters, social media posts, and flyers were distributed, and soon, the march had grown far beyond what Marcus could have anticipated. People from different walks of life, from all races and backgrounds, reached out to show their support. The night before the march, Marcus found himself unable to sleep. His mind kept replaying the same questions over and over. What if he messed up? What if people didn't listen? What if they didn't care? The weight of it all was almost too much to bear, but Veronica's voice broke through his anxiety. Marcus, she said softly, knocking gently on his bedroom door. You okay? He opened the door to find his mom standing there, her calm, reassuring presence making him feel a little lighter. I don't know, Mom. I'm nervous. Veronica smiled and sat down next to him on the bed. I know it's a lot, but remember why you're doing this. You're not just speaking for you. You're speaking for all the people who have been treated unfairly, people who have been silenced. You have a powerful story to tell, and you deserve to be heard. People need to hear what you've gone through, and they need to understand. I know, Marcus said quietly, staring at his hands. But it's more than just sharing my story. I feel like I'm stepping into a battle I can't win. Like it's too big. Veronica gently cupped his chin, lifting his face to meet hers. You don't have to win this battle alone, Marcus. You have a community behind you. And you're already winning. Just by speaking your truth, you've already done something powerful. You're starting a movement, son. This is bigger than you. Her words echoed in his mind as he finally drifted to sleep. The next morning, the nerves still lingered, but the anxiety had dulled. He was ready. The march started at the city park, and Marcus arrived early with Veronica and Alicia. As the crowd began to assemble, he felt a nervous excitement bubbling in his stomach. People gathered in small groups, chatting, holding up signs, and wearing T-shirts with slogans like "End Racism" and "Equality for All." It was a scene of unity, but also a reminder of the gravity of what was at stake. Alicia had been busy checking in with the organizers, making sure everything was in place. "Remember, Marcus," she said as she approached him. "You're not alone. You're standing with so many people who want to see change. And your voice. It's going to be heard." Marcus nodded, the crowd's energy starting to infuse him with a sense of purpose. This was his moment to make a difference. He was no longer just a kid who had been wronged at the bank, he was a part of something much bigger. The march began, and as they made their way down the streets, chanting slogans and waving signs, Marcus felt a surge of pride. The crowd had grown larger than he had ever imagined, filling the streets with their unity and determination. It was impossible to ignore the feeling of solidarity that surrounded him. When they reached the steps of City Hall, Marcus stood near the front of the stage, alongside Alicia and other community leaders. The crowd gathered in front of them, waiting in anticipation. Marcus's heart pounded in his chest as Alicia handed him the microphone. He took a deep breath, stepping forward. The microphone felt heavy in his hand, but he knew he had to do this. "Thank you all for being here today," he began, his voice slightly shaky at first but gaining strength with every word. "I'm standing here because I've been through something that many of you have experienced too. A moment when someone judged me, based on my skin color, and decided I didn't belong. That moment happened in a bank. But for many of us, those moments happen every day. They happen in schools, in workplaces, in stores. They happen in places where we should feel safe and welcome. But we're made to feel less than." The crowd was silent, hanging on his every word. Marcus paused, looking out at the sea of faces, young and old, black and white, all united in their shared purpose. "I'm here to tell you that this has to stop. We can't let people get away with treating us this way anymore. We can't let discrimination go unchecked. It's time for us to rise up, to speak out, and to demand a world where we all are treated equally. A world where no one is judged by the color of their skin but by the content of their character." A cheer erupted from the crowd, and Marcus felt the energy in the air shift. This wasn't just his fight, it was all of theirs. And together, they could make a change. The week following the march, Marcus could barely keep up with the whirlwind that had overtaken his life. The rally had been a huge success. People had come from all over the city, standing together in solidarity for racial equality. The speeches, the chants, the songs, everything had been electric. But what Marcus hadn't anticipated was the aftermath. His words, his story, had resonated with more people than he had ever imagined. The next day, his phone began to buzz non-stop. Messages poured in from friends, acquaintances, and even strangers. Some offered congratulations, while others shared their own stories of discrimination. Some were appreciative of his courage, while others sought advice on how they, too, could get involved in the fight for equality. But it wasn't just messages. He received phone calls from local newspapers and news stations, asking if he would be willing to give interviews. It felt overwhelming at first. Marcus had never imagined that he would be in the spotlight in this way. He had always preferred to stay in the background, to be the quiet observer rather than the one speaking up. But now, with every call, every message, he began to understand the magnitude of the change he was part of. One afternoon, as Marcus sat at the kitchen table, scrolling through his phone, Veronica came in holding a letter. It was from the local school district. Her eyes sparkled with excitement as she handed it to him. "Look at this," she said. "They want you to speak at the next school board meeting. They've heard about the march and your speech, and they want you to talk to the board about what you went through, about what needs to change in our schools." Marcus's heart skipped a beat. Speaking at a school board meeting? The idea felt surreal, but a surge of determination rose within him. This was his chance to take the conversation beyond the march, to bring it to a place where real decisions were made. It was a huge responsibility, but it also felt like the next logical step. "I'll do it," he said, his voice steady even though his mind was racing. "But this time, I want to do more than just talk. I want to propose actual change." Veronica's face lit up with pride. "I knew you'd say that. You've come a long way, Marcus. I'm so proud of you." The school board meeting was scheduled for the following Wednesday evening. Marcus had spent the days leading up to it drafting his speech, practicing his words in front of the mirror, and making sure he was ready. He had to make his point clearly. This wasn't just about his experience, it was about making sure the next generation didn't have to go through the same thing. When the night of the meeting arrived, Marcus and Veronica arrived early, finding their seats near the front. The room was filled with parents, teachers, and community members, all of whom had gathered for the board's regular meeting. The atmosphere was formal but charged with anticipation. The weight of the moment hung in the air, and Marcus could feel it pressing against his chest. The meeting started with the usual business, but when it was Marcus's turn to speak, everything else faded away. All eyes were on him as he approached the podium. His palms were slick with sweat, and his heart was pounding, but he took a deep breath and looked out at the faces in the crowd. "Good evening," Marcus began, his voice a little shaky at first. "My name is Marcus James, and I'm here tonight because I believe that we can make our schools better for every student, no matter their race, their background, or where they come from." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle into the room. He saw some of the board members leaning forward, their interest piqued. "I know that discrimination doesn't just happen in banks or stores," he continued. "It happens in our schools, too. Every day, students are judged, overlooked, or dismissed based on the color of their skin. I've been one of those students. And I'm here to tell you that it has to stop. We need to do more than just talk about diversity and inclusion. We need to take real steps to make sure that every student, no matter where they come from, feels safe, heard, and valued." Marcus's voice grew stronger with each word, and by the time he reached the end of his speech, he could see that the board members were paying close attention. Some were nodding, others were taking notes. "I'm asking the school district to take action. I'm asking for more training for our teachers and staff on unconscious bias and how to create an inclusive environment for all students. I'm asking for programs that teach empathy and understanding, that show students the value of diversity, not just as a concept, but as something we live every day. I'm asking for accountability. If a student or teacher is caught discriminating, there need to be real consequences. Because if we don't make these changes, we're sending a message to our students that this behavior is okay." There was a long silence as Marcus finished speaking, and for a moment, he wondered if he had said too much. But then something remarkable happened. One of the board members, a middle-aged woman named Mrs. Patterson, stood up and addressed the room. "I believe Marcus has made a very important point," she said, her voice firm and clear. "This issue isn't just about one student's experience. It's about all of our students. We have a responsibility to make our schools places where every child feels like they belong. I will make a motion to initiate a review of our diversity and inclusion programs, and to explore the possibility of implementing the training Marcus has suggested." The room was buzzing now, with murmurs of agreement from the audience. The motion passed unanimously, and Marcus felt a rush of relief and pride flood through him. His words had been heard, and now, change was coming. That night, as he and Veronica walked back to the car, Marcus felt a sense of accomplishment he hadn't known was possible. They had made it, he had made it. You did it, Marcus, Veronica said, her voice filled with pride. You stood up for what's right, and now things are going to change. Marcus nodded, his heart swelling with a mix of pride and gratitude. It's just the beginning, Mom. But it feels like we're heading in the right direction. He knew that this fight wasn't over. There would be more battles, more obstacles, and more challenges ahead. But for the first time in his life, Marcus was ready for them. He wasn't fighting alone anymore. He had a community, a movement, and a purpose. And together, they would keep pushing forward. The weeks following Marcus's speech at the school board were nothing short of transformative. The motion to review the district's diversity and inclusion programs passed, and the school board appointed a task force to assess how they could improve their policies and practices. It felt like a victory, but Marcus knew that the real work had only just begun. The changes would take time, and he wasn't about to sit back and wait for someone else to lead the charge. But just as the momentum from the march and the board meeting began to build, new challenges emerged. It wasn't long before Marcus started to see cracks in the progress he had hoped for. At school, the atmosphere was tense. Some students cheered him on, praising his courage and supporting his fight for equality. But others, particularly some of the older students and a few teachers who had been less than receptive to the diversity initiatives, weren't so supportive. He overheard snide comments in the hallways, and some students even began to avoid him altogether. It was subtle at first, the way people distanced themselves, but soon it became clear that his involvement in the march and his outspoken stance on racial equality had alienated a small but vocal group. There were murmurs of troublemaker behind his back, whispers about him being too political. One day, during lunch, Marcus sat with his usual group of friends, Aiden, Jade, and Kira. They were discussing the latest news about the school board's motion when Aiden lowered his voice. Hey, Marcus, can I ask you something? Yeah, sure, Marcus replied, looking up from his phone. Aiden hesitated, clearly uncomfortable. Do you think we're, pushing too hard on this stuff? I mean, I get it, racism's bad, of course. But not everyone thinks that way. You know. Marcus frowned. He had expected support from his friends, but this felt different. Aiden wasn't challenging the message, he was questioning the approach. I'm not pushing anything, Marcus said carefully. I'm just asking for fairness. For everyone to be treated equally. That's not too much to ask. Aiden shifted uncomfortably in his seat. I know. But sometimes, it feels like we're making it into a bigger deal than it really is, you know? People think you're just stirring up problems. Stirring up problems? Marcus repeated, his voice rising. He immediately lowered it again, trying to keep his emotions in check. I'm not making problems. I'm trying to fix them. If we don't talk about this, nothing changes. The tension was palpable, and Marcus could see Aiden's unease. Jade, who had been listening quietly, suddenly spoke up. Marcus is right. We can't ignore the problems just because it's uncomfortable. Pretending things are fine is what keeps it going. Aiden didn't respond immediately, and the silence between them felt heavy. Marcus stared at his half-eaten lunch, his mind spinning. Was he really pushing too hard? Was he alienating people he cared about by standing up for what he believed in? The thought stung more than he expected. That afternoon, Marcus walked home in a daze, the words of his conversation with Aiden echoing in his head. When he arrived, Veronica noticed the look on his face right away. What's wrong, Marcus? She asked, her voice soft but concerned. Marcus dropped his backpack by the door and sat down at the kitchen table. He rubbed his eyes tiredly. I don't know, Mom. It's like people are getting tired of me. Aiden, he thinks I'm going too far with all this. He said I'm stirring up problems. Veronica sat down beside him, her hand gently resting on his shoulder. What do you think? I think I'm doing the right thing. But sometimes, I don't know if it's worth it. I'm just trying to make things better, but it feels like I'm losing my friends over it. People don't get it. Veronica gave him a knowing look. Marcus, the path you're on isn't easy. The changes you're fighting for won't happen overnight, and there will be people who don't understand. They'll question your motives, they'll call you names, they'll try to make you feel like you're wrong. But that's when you need to hold your ground. You're doing this for a reason, and that reason is bigger than any friendship or any misunderstanding. But I don't want to lose my friends, Marcus said quietly, his voice breaking. I don't want them to think I'm crazy. I want things to be better, you know. I want people to be treated like people, no matter their skin color. It shouldn't be this hard. I know, baby, Veronica whispered. I know. But don't let their doubts make you doubt yourself. You're a leader now, whether you like it or not. And leaders don't always have it easy. Sometimes you have to make hard decisions, and sometimes that means standing alone. But you're not alone. Not really. You have your family. You have the community behind you. And most importantly, you have your voice. Marcus nodded, though it didn't make him feel any less uncertain. The following days at school were a struggle. The whispers in the halls grew louder, and the distance between Marcus and some of his friends seemed to widen. Aiden stopped hanging out with him as much, and the tension was evident in every conversation. Despite the growing friction, Marcus pushed on. The school board task force that had been formed to review the district's diversity programs invited him to meet with them. The meeting was a pivotal moment, one that could determine whether the changes he had fought for would truly take root in the district. But when Marcus walked into the meeting room, the weight of the task ahead of him felt heavier than ever. The room was filled with school administrators, a few local leaders, and the members of the task force. At the front, a large whiteboard listed the key goals: creating a more inclusive curriculum, providing better training for teachers, and improving student support services for marginalized groups. Marcus, one of the board members said warmly as he entered, "We're so glad you could join us. We've been reviewing the suggestions you made in your speech, and we'd love to hear more of your thoughts on how we can implement these changes." For the next hour, Marcus spoke with confidence, pushing for concrete actions, mandatory bias training for all staff, a curriculum that truly reflected the diversity of the student body, and measures to ensure that incidents of discrimination were swiftly and fairly addressed. Despite the overwhelming support from the group, there was something unsettling in the air. Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that the changes would take time to come to fruition, and even then, they might not be enough to shift the deeply ingrained attitudes in the school. When he finally left the meeting, he felt more uncertain than ever. The road ahead was long and difficult, and he wasn't sure how much change he would see in his lifetime. But he knew one thing for certain: he couldn't stop. Not now. Not after everything he had started. The days seemed to stretch endlessly for Marcus. He had become accustomed to the tension at school, the stares, the whispered comments, the discomfort in the air. But the hardest part was facing his friends. Aiden, Jade, and Kiera had all been a tight-knit group, but since Marcus had spoken out about the march and the changes he wanted to see, everything felt different. The easy camaraderie they once shared was now replaced by awkward silences and half-hearted attempts at conversation. Aiden, in particular, had withdrawn. He no longer stopped by Marcus's locker or invited him to hang out after school. Instead, he spent more time with a group of older students, ones who Marcus knew had never been particularly fond of his activism. It hurt. It hurt in a way that Marcus hadn't anticipated. He had always assumed that his friends would stand by him, especially when the cause was so clear. But now, he felt isolated, more alone than ever. One Friday afternoon, after a particularly brutal day at school, Marcus sat in his room staring out of the window. His phone vibrated on the desk, and he glanced at it, half expecting it to be another one of his supporters sending an encouraging message. But when he unlocked the screen, he saw a text from Aiden. "Hey, we need to talk. Meet me after school." Marcus's heart dropped. What could Aiden want now? Part of him hoped it was some kind of apology, that Aiden had come around and was ready to talk about what had been happening between them. But another part of him dreaded the conversation. What if Aiden had decided to completely distance himself? What if this was the end of their friendship? When the final bell rang, Marcus grabbed his backpack, slinging it over his shoulder as he walked down the hallway. The buzz of conversation seemed muffled as he made his way to the back of the school where Aiden had asked to meet. Aiden was already there, sitting on a bench, his hands resting in his lap. He looked up when Marcus approached, but his expression was unreadable. "Hey," Marcus said, trying to sound casual, though he could feel his heart beating faster in his chest. "Hey," Aiden replied, his voice low. "I've been thinking a lot about everything that's been happening. About you, and all this stuff with the march, and the speech, and the board meeting. And, I don't know, it's a lot." Marcus nodded, his stomach tightening. "I know it's been intense. But it's important, Aiden. We can't just ignore it. People are still being treated unfairly because of their skin color, and that's not right. I'm just trying to do something about it." Aiden shifted uncomfortably, his eyes darting away from Marcus's. "I get that. I do. But I guess I've just been thinking about where this is all going. The whole thing has made me feel uncomfortable, you know. I feel like I'm getting caught in the middle. It's like, on one hand, I want to support you, but on the other hand, I don't know if I want to keep pushing all this division. It feels like it's making everything worse, not better." The words hit Marcus like a punch to the gut. He could feel the anger and frustration bubbling up, but he held it in, refusing to let it boil over. "Aiden," Marcus said, his voice tight, "this isn't about division. It's about justice. It's about making sure everyone has the same opportunities and the same rights. You can't just ignore the fact that people are suffering. It's not about pushing division. It's about stopping discrimination." Aiden looked down, shaking his head. "I know. But I just think there's gotta be a better way. This whole thing, it's starting to feel like you're making it personal. Like we're all on different sides now." Marcus clenched his fists, trying to stay calm. "You're not on the other side, Aiden. We're on the same side. We're supposed to be fighting for the same thing. But I can't do it alone. I need you with me." Aiden hesitated, his eyes flickering with uncertainty. "I don't know if I can keep doing this. I've lost friends over this. People don't get it, and I don't know if I do either anymore." The words stung more than Marcus had expected. For a moment, he didn't know what to say. He had always believed in the strength of his friendships, in the bond they shared. But now, that bond was unraveling before his eyes. He felt betrayed, not by Aiden, but by the reality that some people weren't ready for the change that needed to happen. "So, that's it?" Marcus asked, his voice small. "You're just going to give up on me?" Aiden looked up, his face softening. "No. I'm not giving up on you, Marcus. I just—" "Then why are you walking away?" Marcus interrupted, his voice rising despite himself. "Why are you backing down when I need you?" Aiden stood up, running a hand through his hair. "I'm not backing down. I'm just," he exhaled sharply. "I don't know. Maybe I'm not ready for all of this. Maybe I'm not the right person for this fight." Marcus stared at him, feeling the anger shift into something more painful, disappointment. "You're not the only one who's not ready, Aiden. But I didn't have a choice. I don't have the luxury of being unsure. People need me. People need us." There was a long silence between them, and for a moment, Marcus wasn't sure if they were going to speak again. But finally, Aiden spoke, his voice quiet. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to let you down. This is harder than I thought it would be." Marcus nodded slowly, his heart aching. "Yeah, it's hard. But it's also necessary. I just hope you can find it in you to be part of the change. If not now, then maybe someday." Aiden's eyes were filled with regret, but he didn't say anything more. He just gave Marcus a long, searching look before turning and walking away. As Marcus watched his friend disappear into the distance, he felt a profound sense of loss. He had always known that standing up for what was right would come with sacrifices, but he hadn't imagined it would cost him a friendship. He wanted to believe that things would get better, that people would come around, but deep down, he knew the road ahead would be filled with more pain and more challenges. Still, as he walked back to his car, Marcus reminded himself of one truth: he couldn't stop now. The fight was bigger than any one friendship. It was bigger than him. And as much as he wished things could be easier, he knew that sometimes, you had to lose something in order to gain something much more important. The days after his conversation with Aiden felt like they dragged on, each one heavier than the last. Marcus had expected the pushback, expected the isolation, but it still hurt more than he'd anticipated. Despite his best efforts to stay focused on the cause, the weight of losing his friend sat heavily on his shoulders. He found himself wondering if he had been too much, too soon, or if the fight for justice was destined to cost him the things he cared about most. It was hard to focus on anything else, even when the world around him seemed to keep moving. School was the same: awkward glances, hushed whispers, and a growing divide between the students who supported him and those who didn't. The teachers, too, were starting to avoid him, their interactions with him becoming stilted and guarded. It was as if the energy he tried to bring to the conversation was being met with a mixture of fatigue and fear. No one seemed to know how to deal with the questions he was raising, and it left him feeling like an outcast. But despite all the challenges, Marcus refused to give up. He kept his focus on what needed to be done. He'd learned early on that the path to change was rarely smooth. The setbacks, though painful, were just a part of the process. One afternoon, after school, Marcus was sitting at the kitchen table, scrolling through social media on his phone. The news about his school's diversity efforts had made it into the local papers, and people were still talking about the speech he gave at the board meeting. Some of the comments were supportive, others were outright hostile. It was a strange mix of praise and criticism, and it left Marcus feeling both empowered and defeated at the same time. Suddenly, his phone buzzed. It was a text from Kira. "Hey, can we talk?" Marcus hadn't heard much from her since the tension between him and Aiden started. He didn't know what to expect, but he was relieved that at least one person seemed willing to engage with him. He quickly typed back. "Sure. When? Meet me at the park in 30 minutes. Marcus agreed, throwing on his jacket before heading out the door. The cool evening air hit him as he made his way to the park. The trees were just beginning to show their fall colors, and there was a crispness in the air that reminded him that change was everywhere, not just in the world around him, but within himself as well. When he arrived, Kira was already sitting on the swing, her legs lightly swaying back and forth. She looked up when Marcus approached, offering him a small smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Hey," Marcus greeted, sitting down on the swing next to hers. "Hey," Kira replied, her voice quiet. There was a pause before she spoke again. "I've been thinking about everything. A lot." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" "About Aiden," she said softly. "About the whole thing. I think I've been avoiding you, too. I didn't know what to say, and I didn't want to make things worse." "I get it," Marcus said, his voice strained. "Aiden's not the only one who's been pulling away. I know I've kind of been pushing everyone away, too. I just didn't think it would be like this. I thought people would see what I'm trying to do, and I thought they'd get it." Kira sighed and looked down at the ground, her hands gripping the chains of the swing. "I understand why you're doing it, Marcus. I really do. But sometimes it feels like you're asking too much from people all at once. We're all trying to figure out where we stand, and sometimes it's not easy to just jump into something so big. Especially when it's so new." Marcus nodded, his heart heavy. "I didn't realize how hard it would be for everyone. I guess I just thought if I did the right thing, the people around me would understand. But I've been so caught up in this fight that I didn't think about how it might affect my friends. I didn't think about how hard it might be for you." Kira was quiet for a moment, and then she looked at him, her expression softer than before. "You're not the only one who's struggling with this, Marcus. I see what's happening at school. I see how people are treating you, and I hate it. It's not fair. But I also see how you're pushing, and I don't know if I'm strong enough to be a part of that, at least not in the way you want me to be." Marcus felt a pang of disappointment. He had hoped that Kira would offer him a sense of solidarity, a lifeline in the midst of all the chaos. But her words weren't as firm as he'd hoped. "I get that," he said quietly. "I don't want anyone to feel like they have to take on this fight if they're not ready. But I can't stop, Kira. I've already started something, and if I back down now, everything will be for nothing." Kira nodded slowly, her gaze fixed on the horizon. "I know. And I don't think you should stop. I just think you need to understand that people are scared, Marcus. Change is scary, especially when it's something you don't fully understand. They don't want to hurt you, but they're not sure how to help you, either." There was a long silence, and for the first time in weeks, Marcus felt like someone truly understood the weight of what he was carrying. "I don't know what to do anymore," he admitted, his voice breaking. "It feels like I'm alone in all this, like I'm the only one who cares enough to make it happen." "You're not alone," Kira said, her voice firm now. "You have me. You have others who are willing to stand by you. It's just going to take time. People need to see that you're not just fighting for yourself, but for all of us." Marcus looked at Kira, feeling the smallest sense of hope spark in his chest. "Do you really think so?" "I do," she said, giving him a small smile. "It's just going to be a long road. But you're not the only one who's walking it. And we'll be right behind you, even if we don't know how to walk it yet." The conversation with Kira didn't fix everything, but it helped more than Marcus could have imagined. He left the park that evening feeling a little lighter, as if the weight of the world was just a little less heavy on his shoulders. There was still so much to do, so much to change, but he wasn't completely alone in this fight anymore. Maybe not everyone understood, but there were people who believed in him, who were willing to stand with him when things got tough. As Marcus lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling, he thought about everything he had been through so far, the doubts, the loneliness, the setbacks. And he realized that while the road ahead was uncertain, he could no longer focus on what he might lose. He had to keep his eyes on the bigger picture, the people who needed him to keep fighting. The people who were waiting for him to lead. Tomorrow would be another day, another challenge, but Marcus knew one thing for certain: he was going to keep moving forward. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? The morning after his conversation with Kira, Marcus felt something different inside him. There was still a heavy weight on his shoulders, but it didn't feel as oppressive as it had before. He had spent the night thinking about everything: his friends, his school, the community around him, and he realized something important. He couldn't control how everyone responded to his actions, but he could control how he responded to their lack of understanding. That morning, he woke up earlier than usual. His phone had been buzzing with messages, both supportive and critical. Some of his classmates had begun to speak out against the changes he was fighting for, but others, strangers, even, had shown up in his inbox to offer words of encouragement. A small part of him felt a rush of relief. The world wasn't as hostile as it sometimes seemed. There were people out there who understood his message and his purpose. Marcus got out of bed, feeling determined. He didn't know exactly what today would bring, but he was ready to face it. He grabbed his bag, slinging it over his shoulder, and headed for the door. It wasn't just about surviving the day anymore, it was about making it count. He needed to find new ways to engage with the people who weren't yet on board with the cause. As he walked to school, his mind began to buzz with ideas. He knew that simply pushing the march, the speeches, and the protests wouldn't be enough. What he needed was a way to bring the conversation to a wider audience, to show his peers, his teachers, even, that this wasn't just some fleeting moment of activism. This was a movement, and movements took persistence. They took planning. The day started like any other, with the usual glares from some of his classmates, the murmurs of "here comes the troublemaker," and the occasional supportive smile from a student who was on his side. But today, Marcus noticed something new. There was an edge in the air, something different about the way people were looking at him. It wasn't just avoidance anymore, it was like they were starting to think about what he was saying, to reconsider their positions. Maybe, just maybe, some of them were beginning to listen. When he arrived at his first class, English, the teacher, Mrs. Turner, surprised him by acknowledging his recent speech in front of the board. "Marcus, I just wanted to say that I've been following your work lately," she said, her voice calm but filled with respect. "I think it's important that you're challenging the status quo. But I also think it's important to engage in dialogue, to ensure we don't just push people away with our views." Marcus felt his heart race a little. He wasn't sure how to respond at first. Mrs. Turner had always been a supportive teacher, but hearing her speak so directly about his activism felt different. "I agree," he said cautiously. "That's kind of what I'm trying to do, start a conversation. But sometimes it feels like people aren't even willing to listen." "You'd be surprised," she said, giving him a knowing smile. "Sometimes, all it takes is the right moment to reach people. Maybe you could consider using your next speech or presentation as an opportunity to share why this is so important, why you're not just fighting for yourself but for everyone." Marcus nodded, grateful for her understanding. It wasn't a perfect solution, but it was a start. Maybe he didn't need to push people away, maybe he just needed to meet them where they were, to find common ground and build on it. After class, Marcus walked to his locker, still thinking about what Mrs. Turner had said. It was a small gesture of support, but it felt like a lifeline. And that's when he noticed something even more unexpected. Aiden was standing at his locker, looking a little uncertain. "Marcus," Aiden said, his voice hesitant. "Can we talk?" Marcus stopped in his tracks, staring at his friend. It had been days since their last conversation, and he didn't know what to expect from Aiden now. He had assumed their friendship was over, but here he was, standing in front of him, his hands stuffed in his pockets. "I don't know what to say to you, Aiden," Marcus replied, the frustration still lingering in his tone. "After everything, you've been avoiding me, and now, what, you just want to pick up where we left off?" Aiden's face softened. "No. I know I've messed up. I've been thinking a lot about what you said, about how this fight isn't just about you. It's about all of us. I didn't get that before, and I've been struggling with how to be a part of it." Marcus took a deep breath, trying to keep his emotions in check. "It's not just something you can jump into when it's convenient, Aiden. This is my life, my reality. I can't stop fighting just because it's uncomfortable." Aiden nodded, his eyes sincere. "I get that now. I'm not going to pretend I have all the answers, but I want to try and help. I don't know how, but I want to support you. I know I can't change the past, but maybe we can move forward." For a long moment, Marcus just looked at his friend. He had every right to be angry, to hold on to his hurt, but he also knew something deep inside, holding on to bitterness wasn't going to help anyone. He could either keep pushing people away or give them the chance to prove they could be part of the solution. "I don't know, Aiden," Marcus said quietly. "I want to believe you, but it's hard." "I get it," Aiden said. "I really do. But if you'll let me, I want to be there for you. I want to help make things right." Marcus took a deep breath, letting the words settle inside him. Maybe this wasn't the end of their friendship after all. Maybe it was the beginning of something new, something better. "I'll give you a chance," Marcus said, his voice steady. "But don't let me down again." Aiden smiled, relief flooding his face. "I won't. I promise." As they walked to their next class together, Marcus felt a sense of cautious optimism stirring inside him. It wasn't a perfect resolution, but it was progress. He didn't have all the answers, and he certainly didn't know where the road ahead would lead, but for the first time in a while, he felt like he might be able to make a real difference. That afternoon, Marcus received an unexpected message from Jade. She had sent him a link to an article about a local youth empowerment conference coming up, one that was focusing on racial equality and community building. It was a sign that the world around him was starting to wake up, even if only a little bit. It was small, but it was something he could work with. He knew the journey wouldn't be easy, and there would be days when the weight of everything would feel unbearable. But for the first time in a long while, Marcus was starting to believe in the possibility of change. It was slow, incremental, but it was happening. And that was enough. The days following Aiden's apology felt like a turning point. The tension that had built between them over the past few weeks had started to dissolve, replaced by an unspoken understanding. Though their friendship had been tested, Marcus couldn't deny that seeing his old friend step up meant something. It wasn't a grand gesture, but it was real. And that was more than Marcus could have asked for after everything that had happened. However, the road ahead was still long. Marcus knew that he couldn't simply rely on the support of a few individuals to push the changes he wanted to see. If anything, his experience had shown him that he had to bring more people into the conversation, more people who weren't already convinced of the importance of this cause. He couldn't afford to let himself fall into the trap of assuming that his circle of friends and allies would be enough. That afternoon, as Marcus sat in the library trying to catch up on some homework, his phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen. It was a message from Jade. "Hey, I've been thinking. What if we organized a small group discussion at lunch? We could talk to people about why this issue matters. We could show them the stories we've been reading and see what they think. Could be a good way to get others involved." Marcus couldn't help but smile. It was simple, but it was the kind of proactive idea he had been waiting for. He quickly typed a response. "That sounds perfect. Let's talk about it after school and figure out how to get people to come." Jade replied almost immediately. "Great. I'll start making some flyers. We'll need to keep it low-key at first, just to gauge interest. Maybe if we get a good turnout, we can talk to the administration about making it a regular thing." Marcus felt a surge of excitement. This wasn't just about him anymore, it was about involving others, getting them to understand the importance of the conversation. This could be the beginning of something bigger, something that went beyond speeches and protests and instead brought real dialogue into the heart of his school. The bell rang, signaling the end of the school day. Marcus met Jade near the entrance, and the two of them quickly walked toward the cafeteria, where they planned to set up their discussion table. The excitement was palpable, but so was the uncertainty. Would people actually show up? Would they even care? As they entered the cafeteria, Marcus scanned the room. The students were scattered in groups, chatting over lunch, some in the middle of heated debates about the latest gossip or trending topic. But there was a subtle difference now, an awareness in the air, as if something had shifted. Maybe it was because of his speech at the board meeting, or maybe it was the news of the diversity initiative, but it felt like people were beginning to take notice. "Do you think they'll come?" Jade asked, looking around skeptically. Marcus shrugged. "I'm not sure. But we won't know unless we try, right?" Together, they set up a small table near the center of the cafeteria, laying out flyers that explained the discussion they wanted to hold and the purpose behind it. They made sure to keep the language simple, nothing too complicated or overbearing. The goal was to start small, to open up a conversation that didn't feel like a lecture. They weren't asking anyone to take a stand just yet, they were simply asking them to listen. Within minutes, a few curious students approached, reading the flyers and asking questions. Marcus could feel his nerves kick in. This was it, the moment of truth. Would this small gathering grow into something bigger? Or would it fizzle out, just another half-hearted attempt at change? But then something unexpected happened. Aiden appeared in the doorway of the cafeteria, his usual confident stride replaced with a hesitant but determined walk. He looked over at Marcus, offering a quick wave before heading over to the table. "I'm here to help," Aiden said, his voice steady but laced with a hint of nervousness. "What can I do?" Marcus blinked in surprise but quickly recovered. Well, just help get the word out. Talk to people. If you can, maybe ask some of your friends to come." Aiden nodded, and Marcus could see the sincerity in his eyes. It was a sign that he wasn't just here out of obligation, but because he wanted to make things right. The more people they could get involved, the better. They needed to break through the barrier of indifference, to show people that this wasn't just a personal issue, it was everyone's issue. As the lunch period continued, more and more students filtered by, some stopping to take a flyer, others pausing for a moment to chat with Marcus and Jade. There was a mix of curiosity and skepticism, but it was something. It was a start. By the end of lunch, they had a small group of students committed to joining the discussion. It wasn't a huge turnout, but it was enough to build momentum. Marcus felt a sense of pride swell in his chest. They had done it. They had started the conversation. Later that afternoon, Marcus sat in his room, reflecting on the events of the day. The group discussion would take place tomorrow during lunch, and though he was still anxious about how it would go, he couldn't deny the sense of accomplishment that lingered in his mind. For the first time in a while, he felt like the walls of resistance were beginning to crack, like the path to change was becoming just a little bit clearer. His phone buzzed again, breaking his thoughts. It was a message from Kira. "I'm proud of you, Marcus. I saw what you did today. It's a small step, but it's a step in the right direction. Keep pushing." Marcus smiled to himself, grateful for the support. He wasn't sure if he was ready to tackle the whole system on his own, but he no longer felt like he was carrying the weight of the world alone. People were beginning to rally behind him. This wasn't just about making noise, it was about starting a real dialogue. It was about turning silence into action. As he read Kira's message again, Marcus felt a renewed sense of purpose. He was ready for tomorrow. Whatever came next, he would face it head-on. The next day at lunch, Marcus stood at the front of the small group that had gathered in the corner of the cafeteria. The table, now cluttered with pamphlets and half-filled water bottles, had become the unofficial center for the conversation. More people had shown up than Marcus had expected, though the group was still modest compared to the cafeteria's usual bustle. There were a few familiar faces, students who had shown interest the day before, but there were also new ones, some from other grades, a few he didn't recognize at all. It was a mixture of curiosity, uncertainty, and something else. Was it hope? Or was it just the desire to understand? Marcus stood tall, feeling the weight of the moment. This was the beginning of something. He could feel it in his chest. The last few weeks had been about raising awareness, speaking out, and demanding change. But this? This was different. This was about dialogue. This was about listening and learning together. "Okay," Marcus said, clearing his throat to gather everyone's attention. "Thanks for coming, everyone. I know it's not easy to sit down and talk about stuff like this, but if we're going to make any real change, it's gotta start with conversations, honest conversations. And that's what we're here to do today." Jade, sitting next to him, gave him a quick nod of encouragement, her eyes wide with anticipation. She'd been instrumental in pulling this all together, reaching out to others, and printing flyers to spread the word. Her energy was infectious, and Marcus couldn't help but feel grateful for her commitment. "Now," Marcus continued, "I'm not here to lecture anyone. I just want to share some of the things I've learned in my own journey, and hear what you all think. Why does this issue matter? What can we do to make things better? I want to hear your voices, too." There was a moment of silence as the group shifted in their seats. Some students were still hesitant, unsure of what they were stepping into. But slowly, as the conversation began to unfold, the atmosphere shifted. It wasn't just Marcus talking. It wasn't just his experience being shared, it was everyone's. They talked about the stereotypes they faced, the biases they'd witnessed, and the discomfort that had grown within the walls of their school. The more they shared, the more it felt like a real conversation, not just a lecture. It was at that moment that Marcus realized something. This wasn't just about changing the minds of others, it was about breaking down barriers. And these barriers weren't always visible. They were built from years of ignorance, fear, and a lack of understanding. But as the students around him spoke, those barriers seemed to begin to crumble, slowly, piece by piece. A girl named Emily, a sophomore Marcus had never spoken to before, raised her hand tentatively. I didn't think about it like this before, she said, her voice soft but filled with sincerity. I always thought people were just exaggerating. Like, that racism was a thing of the past. But after hearing you guys talk, I get it now. I've seen it happen, I just didn't know how to process it. Her words struck a chord with Marcus. He'd always believed that the only way to bring about real change was to make others confront uncomfortable truths. But this conversation was proving him wrong. Sometimes, change didn't have to come from anger or force, it could come from understanding and vulnerability. I used to think the same thing, Marcus admitted, looking at her. I didn't get it at first, either. But when you start to see the bigger picture, it becomes impossible to ignore. Aiden, sitting across from him, spoke up. It's like, I know I'm not the one who's been targeted, but it doesn't mean I can't do something about it. Like, just because I'm not the one being discriminated against doesn't mean I shouldn't care. It's on all of us, you know. The others around the table nodded in agreement. There was something powerful in those words. The sense of solidarity was growing stronger by the minute. It wasn't just Marcus's fight anymore, it was a fight that belonged to everyone. I think the first step is getting people to realize how much we're all affected by this, Marcus said, his voice steady. It's not just about what happens to one person, it's about how we're all affected when we let these things slide. There was a brief pause as the group took in his words. The students who had been quieter up until now began to speak, offering their thoughts, even if they were unsure. They asked questions, shared personal experiences, and in some cases, even admitted to their own mistakes and misconceptions. Maybe we could start something bigger, Emily said after a long pause. Like, something that goes beyond just a group meeting. Maybe a campaign or something. Marcus looked around at the students gathered around the table. What started as a simple conversation was now morphing into something more. It wasn't just about sharing stories anymore, it was about organizing, taking action, and finding ways to engage the larger community. This could be the start of something monumental, but it would require everyone's involvement. That's a great idea, Marcus said, feeling the excitement build in his chest. Maybe we can start with something small, like a mural or a petition. Something that shows we're serious about making change happen. And once we have that, we can use it to get more people involved, teachers, parents, even the administration. The more we show that this isn't just a small group, the bigger impact we can make. The group erupted into conversation, throwing out ideas and brainstorming ways to expand the movement. What started as a few students at a table had now turned into a full-on strategy session, and Marcus could hardly believe the momentum they were building. They were turning words into action, transforming uncertainty into a collective desire for change. As lunch ended and the bell rang, Marcus felt a sense of accomplishment that he hadn't experienced before. There was still a long road ahead, but the foundation had been laid. The spark that had started as a small fire in his heart had now become a blazing, unstoppable force, one that was gathering strength with every new voice that joined the movement. He couldn't help but think of his mother, Kira, and what she had said to him the night before. This wasn't just about him anymore. This was about all of them. About breaking barriers, about opening minds, and about standing together to create the kind of world they all deserve to live in. And with that thought, he made a promise to himself, this was just the beginning. The days that followed the group discussion were a blur of activity. The momentum was undeniable. What had started as a small, intimate conversation during lunch had quickly snowballed into something much larger. Students who had participated in the meeting were now bringing in their friends. They were signing petitions, spreading the word, and, most importantly, listening. Marcus had never seen the cafeteria so alive with energy, with students not just talking about their schoolwork or social media, but about change. Real change. Marcus spent most of his time after school working with Jade and the others, brainstorming ideas for their campaign. They wanted to create a movement that could extend beyond their small group, one that would get the attention of the school's administration and even the parents. It was no longer enough to simply have a few meetings, they needed to show their school that this issue was something worth addressing. One afternoon, while Marcus was working on a banner for their upcoming rally, his phone buzzed with a new message. It was from Aiden. "Hey, are you free tonight? I was thinking we could meet up and talk about what's next. I've been talking to some of the teachers, and they seem to be more open to the idea of us doing something bigger. What do you think?" Marcus sat back in his chair, thinking about the past few weeks. The transformation he'd seen in himself and his peers was undeniable. From feeling like an outsider to suddenly being part of something that could change the course of his school's history, it was overwhelming, but it was also incredibly empowering. "Yeah, let's meet up. I think we're ready to push forward." Marcus typed back, hitting send before grabbing his jacket and heading out the door to meet Aiden. That evening, they met at the local coffee shop, a cozy place Marcus often frequented to get away from the chaos of school life. Aiden was already sitting at a table when Marcus arrived, his laptop open in front of him, papers scattered across the table. There was an intensity in his posture, a quiet determination that Marcus hadn't seen before. It made him feel like they were on the cusp of something bigger than he could have imagined. "Hey, man," Marcus greeted, taking a seat across from him. "What's up?" Aiden didn't waste any time. "So, I've been talking to Ms. Langford, the history teacher. She said she'd be willing to let us present our ideas to the whole school in her class if we can get some more concrete plans together. I also spoke to Mr. Bellamy, the principal. He said he's open to the idea of a student-led initiative, but he wants to see what kind of support we have." Marcus nodded, processing the information. They were gaining traction, but the challenge now was to take their ideas and turn them into something that could actually be implemented. They needed the backing of the administration if they wanted this movement to grow, and that meant proving they had support from the students. "We need more people, then," Marcus said, his voice steady. "We can't just rely on the people who've already joined. We need to get more of the student body involved, those who are still sitting on the sidelines." Aiden agreed. "Exactly. And I was thinking, we could start a social media campaign. Something that spreads awareness about why this movement matters and how they can be part of it. The more students see that it's not just a few of us pushing this, the more likely they are to jump on board." The idea hit Marcus like a bolt of lightning. Social media was powerful, it could amplify their message and give them the platform they needed to reach a wider audience. They could share their story, highlight real experiences, and ask others to share theirs. It was the perfect way to take their message beyond the confines of the school and into the community. "I love it," Marcus said. "We'll need to design a hashtag, something that sticks and encourages people to share their stories. And we'll need to make sure it's accessible, so people who are hesitant don't feel like they have to come forward with anything too personal if they're not ready." Aiden smiled. "I was thinking the same thing. We can make it open, but still make sure it carries weight." They spent the next hour hashing out the details. Aiden worked on a graphic for the campaign, while Marcus drafted a post they could share across all social media platforms. Their hashtag? Hashtag Together for Change. It was simple, yet powerful, something that could unify the student body under a common cause. When they finished, Aiden leaned back in his chair and took a deep breath. "I think we're ready. If we can get this rolling, we can present it to Ms. Langford and Mr. Bellamy by next week. We'll need some student volunteers to help with the campaign, though." Marcus nodded, feeling a surge of determination. "I'll put the word out tomorrow." We can't stop now. The following week was a whirlwind. Marcus and Aiden took to the halls between classes, talking to anyone who would listen. They handed out flyers, posted on social media, and even made announcements during morning assembly. Slowly, their efforts began to pay off. Students who had been skeptical at first were now showing interest. Even some teachers had started to reach out, asking how they could help. By the time the meeting with Ms. Langford and Mr. Bellamy arrived, Marcus felt confident. The campaign was picking up speed, and they had a growing group of students who were ready to take action. The support was undeniable, and now it was time to take it to the next level. As he and Aiden entered the administration building, they were greeted by Ms. Langford and Mr. Bellamy, both of whom were sitting at a large conference table, ready to hear what the students had put together. Ms. Langford smiled warmly at them. "We've been following your campaign, and I have to say, I'm impressed. This is exactly the kind of initiative we want to see from our students." Mr. Bellamy, a man known for his no-nonsense approach, leaned forward. "So, what's the plan? How do you want us to be involved?" Marcus exchanged a glance with Aiden. This was it. The moment they had been working for. "We want this to be more than just a one-time event," Marcus said, his voice firm. "We want to create a lasting impact, a movement that changes the culture of this school. We need your support to help us bring it to life. We want to organize events, talks, workshops, anything that starts a dialogue and gets people involved. And we want your backing for a school-wide initiative that will keep this conversation going long after we graduate." Aiden chimed in, his confidence growing. "We need your help to make this an ongoing part of the school curriculum. It's not enough to have one big event. We need students to see that this is something that matters every day." Mr. Bellamy and Ms. Langford exchanged a look. For a brief moment, Marcus felt his stomach tighten. But then, to his surprise, Ms. Langford spoke. "All right," she said, nodding slowly. "We'll support you. We'll help get the resources, and we'll make sure this becomes part of the conversation in our school." Marcus's heart swelled with pride. This wasn't just about getting approval, it was about starting a movement that had the potential to change everything. The day after securing the support from Ms. Langford and Mr. Bellamy felt surreal. Marcus couldn't help but walk through the halls with a sense of purpose, his head held higher than usual. It was as if the school had shifted overnight. What had once seemed like a small movement had grown into something tangible, something that could actually make a difference. The buzz around the campaign was undeniable. Word spread quickly, and soon students were showing up to their meetings in droves. The hallway chatter was no longer centered around the latest gossip or what had happened in the latest basketball game. It was about equality. It was about fairness. And most of all, it was about action. Marcus found himself walking into the cafeteria that day with Jade and Aiden, both of them talking animatedly about the ideas they were brainstorming for an upcoming event. There was a real sense of excitement in the air, and even though they were all busy with schoolwork and preparations for the big event, none of it felt like a burden anymore. It felt like a mission. It felt like they were doing something important, something that mattered. "Do you feel that?" Jade asked as they found a table. "The energy is different. People are actually talking about this." Marcus nodded, scanning the cafeteria. A group of juniors were discussing the flyer they'd seen earlier about the upcoming rally, and a pair of sophomores were talking about how they could use social media to amplify their voices. Everywhere he looked, there was a shift that he hadn't expected to happen so quickly. "I never imagined it would blow up like this," Aiden said, setting down his tray. "I mean, I knew we had a chance to make a difference, but this is more than I expected." "That's because we're not alone anymore," Marcus said, his voice steady. "We've got the support of so many people now, and it's only going to keep growing. But we have to keep pushing. We can't stop here." Just then, Marcus's phone buzzed again. It was a message from his mom, Kira. "Hey, sweetie. Just wanted to check in. How's everything going with the campaign? I'm so proud of you. If you need anything, I'm here." Marcus smiled, reading her message. His mom had been his anchor throughout this entire process. Even when he doubted himself, she believed in him. She was the one who had first shown him that true change came not from silence, but from speaking up. And now, he was doing just that. He quickly typed back, "Thanks, Mom. Everything's going great. I'll keep you updated." The next few days were a whirlwind of activity. Marcus and his team finalized the details for their school-wide event, a day dedicated to raising awareness about racial injustice and creating a platform for discussion. They'd planned speakers, workshops, and performances to reflect the diversity of experiences within their community. The excitement was contagious, and even teachers who weren't directly involved were offering their support in any way they could. But as the day of the event grew nearer, so did the pressure. Marcus found himself increasingly anxious. What if things didn't go as planned? What if they didn't have enough support? What if the school's administration backed out last minute? These doubts crept in like silent shadows, threatening to derail his focus. It was during one of these quiet moments, as he sat in his room alone, that he received a message from a familiar name, an unexpected one. "Marcus, I think we need to talk." It was from Tyler, the student who had been at the center of the incident that had started all of this. The boy who had been treated unfairly at the bank. The one who had experienced firsthand what racism in their community looked like. Marcus's heart skipped a beat. He had been so wrapped up in the campaign that he hadn't really thought about Tyler in a while. Tyler had been a symbol of why they were doing all of this, but it had never really crossed his mind that Tyler might be struggling with his own feelings about everything. "Are you okay?" Marcus quickly typed back, the urgency in his message clear. Tyler's response was quick. "I don't know, man. I thought I was okay, but things are getting harder. People are asking questions, and I don't know how to explain everything that happened to me. It just feels like people think I'm just some poster child for this movement. I'm not sure I even belong in all of this." Marcus's chest tightened. He understood. He hadn't really thought about how Tyler might be processing everything. Tyler had been thrust into the middle of a storm, and now that the storm was gaining momentum, Tyler was caught in its winds. "You do belong," Marcus typed quickly. "You're the reason this started. You gave all of us the push we needed to start talking about the things that have been ignored for too long. But I get it, it's hard. I'm here for you. We're all here for you." Tyler's response came after a long pause. "Thanks, Marcus. I don't know what I'd do without you guys." Marcus sat back, staring at the message. He hadn't realized how much pressure Tyler was under, how much weight he had been carrying since the incident. This wasn't just about Marcus and his friends anymore. This was about people like Tyler, who were directly affected by the very issues they were fighting against. It was a sobering realization, one that made Marcus even more determined to make the event a success. He wasn't just fighting for justice for the people who were actively involved in the movement, he was fighting for everyone who had ever been silenced, who had ever been overlooked, or whose struggles had been dismissed. The morning of the event arrived, and the school was buzzing with activity. Posters lined the hallways, promoting the day's activities. The gymnasium was transformed into a space for workshops, where students could engage with topics ranging from microaggressions to systemic racism. In the auditorium, speakers from various community organizations were scheduled to talk about their experiences and what needed to be done to create lasting change. Marcus walked through the halls, watching as students filtered in, chatting excitedly with each other, their faces lit up with anticipation. For once, the buzz wasn't about the latest trends or the hottest social media posts. It was about something bigger. It was about the future. As he entered the gymnasium, Marcus saw Aiden and Jade talking with a group of students, making sure everything was set up. The air was thick with a mixture of nervous excitement. It felt like the entire school was holding its breath, waiting for something to shift. "You ready?" Aiden asked as Marcus approached. Marcus took a deep breath, trying to steady his nerves. I think so. It's all happening today. Jade smiled at him, her eyes full of pride. You've come a long way, Marcus. We all have. Yeah, Marcus said, looking around at the group of students who were there to support the cause. We really have. And with that, he stepped forward into the gym, ready to make his mark. The sun shone brightly that morning, casting a warm glow over the campus. It was the kind of day that felt full of potential, like the universe itself was holding its breath for what was to come. Marcus stood outside the school's main entrance, taking in the sight of students trickling in. They were more than just classmates today, they were participants in something much bigger. He could feel the weight of it all pressing down on him. The posters on the walls. The signs in the hallways. The banners fluttering in the wind. This was real. This was happening. And it was all because of him and the people who had rallied behind him. But despite the excitement, Marcus couldn't shake off the nerves. What if it wasn't enough? What if the event didn't go as planned? The doubts had been lurking in the back of his mind for days, and today, they felt even more palpable. He turned his focus inward, trying to calm his racing thoughts. There was no turning back now. They had worked too hard for this, and there were too many people who believed in the cause. You okay? Aiden's voice broke through Marcus's thoughts. Marcus looked up to see his best friend standing next to him, a knowing expression on his face. I think so, Marcus said, forcing a smile. Just, a little nervous, you know. What if it doesn't work? What if no one shows up? Aiden chuckled and slapped him on the back. Man, you've been stressing about this for days. Look around you. The whole school is buzzing about it. You've done the hard part. Now all we have to do is show up and let people know they matter. It's about them, not us. Marcus nodded slowly. Right. It's bigger than just us. It's about everyone who's ever been left out. The bell rang, signaling the start of the day, and students began to flood through the doors. Marcus, Aiden, and Jade made their way to the gymnasium, where the first event was set to take place. The room was already buzzing with energy. Students were arranging chairs for the workshops, setting up tables with information, and adjusting microphones for the speakers. Let's do this, Jade said, her voice determined. It's happening. By 9 a.m., the event was in full swing. The gym was packed with students, each eager to participate in the workshops, attend the guest speaker sessions, or simply learn more about the cause. The walls of the gym had been transformed into a mosaic of posters, each one telling a different story about racial injustice, unity, and the power of collective action. The atmosphere was electric, charged with a sense of purpose and urgency. Marcus walked around the gym, his heart swelling with pride. This wasn't just a one-off event, it was a movement that had taken root, one that was slowly but surely changing the school. Students were no longer just passive observers, they were active participants in a larger conversation about race, equality, and justice. It was a conversation that had been long overdue. He paused by one of the booths, where a group of juniors were explaining the history of racial discrimination in the United States. They were engaging with other students, asking questions, sharing stories, and listening intently. It was everything Marcus had hoped for, a true dialogue. Across the room, Aiden was standing by a table with a large whiteboard, writing down ideas and thoughts that students were sharing. Jade was nearby, talking with a group of seniors who had volunteered to help with the event. She was passionate, her words flowing effortlessly as she engaged with them, making sure everyone felt included. The first speaker of the day, a local civil rights activist, took the stage at 9:30. The room fell silent as he introduced himself and began to speak. His words were powerful, his voice steady as he talked about the history of racial inequality and the importance of standing up for what was right. His message was one of hope, but also of action. He didn't just talk about what had happened, he talked about what needed to happen next. We can't wait for change to come to us, the speaker said, his voice echoing throughout the gym. We have to demand it. We have to be the change we want to see in the world. And we start by speaking out, by coming together, by making our voices heard. The crowd erupted in applause. Marcus felt a surge of emotion rise in his chest. He had known this day would be significant, but hearing those words from someone who had dedicated their life to fighting for justice made it all feel real. This wasn't just about his school anymore, it was about something much larger. They were part of a long tradition of activists and changemakers who had fought for equality, and now it was their turn. As the day wore on, Marcus found himself caught up in the whirlwind of activities. Workshops on racial sensitivity and privilege, panels about systemic injustice, and even an open mic session where students shared their personal stories. Each part of the event was a testament to the hard work and dedication of everyone involved. It was an overwhelming but deeply satisfying feeling to see it all come together. Around lunchtime, Marcus took a moment to step outside and get some fresh air. He needed a break, and the quiet of the courtyard offered a brief respite from the noise and activity of the gym. As he sat on a bench, he pulled out his phone and scrolled through social media. The hashtag Together for Change was trending, and there were hundreds of posts from students, teachers, and even parents, all sharing their thoughts, photos, and stories about the event. It was working. The movement was growing, and it was bigger than anything he had ever imagined. "Hey, you good?" Aiden's voice broke Marcus out of his thoughts. Marcus looked up to see Aiden standing in front of him, a concerned look on his face. "Yeah, just taking a minute," Marcus replied, standing up. "This is a lot to take in. It's all happening, and I'm still trying to process it." Aiden smiled. "I get it. But look around you, man. This is real. You started something big, and now it's spreading." Marcus glanced back at the gym, where students were engaged in conversations, learning, and sharing. For the first time in a long while, he felt a deep sense of fulfillment. They were doing it. They were changing the conversation at their school, and maybe even beyond it. The final event of the day was a community discussion panel, where students, teachers, and parents would come together to talk about the next steps in the movement. It was the culmination of everything they had worked toward, and Marcus knew it would be the most challenging part of the day. But he also knew it was the most important. They had to keep the conversation going. They had to ensure that the momentum didn't die out once the event was over. The panel began with a few prepared questions, but soon, the discussion opened up, with students and teachers alike speaking candidly about their experiences. Some shared stories of how they had personally been affected by racism, while others discussed the subtle ways in which discrimination had shown up in their lives, whether through microaggressions, biases in the classroom, or systemic inequalities. Marcus listened intently, his heart heavy with the weight of the stories being shared. But amidst the sadness, there was also hope. There was a collective commitment to creating change, to standing up for what was right, and to supporting one another. For the first time, the room felt united, not divided by race, but unified in a shared commitment to make the world a better place. As the panel came to an end, the applause was deafening. The room was filled with a sense of accomplishment and pride. Marcus felt a deep sense of satisfaction, knowing that they had started something that would continue long after this day. But even as the event concluded, Marcus knew that their work was far from over. This was just the beginning. There was still so much to do, so much to change. But for now, he allowed himself a moment of peace, a moment to savor the success of today. And as he looked around at the faces of his friends and peers, he knew one thing for certain: they had made a difference. The days following the event were a blur of activity. Marcus woke up every morning feeling like his life had been turned upside down. What had started as a small, focused initiative had become a full-scale movement within their school and even within the local community. His inbox was filled with messages of support and questions about what the next steps would be. It felt surreal, almost as if he was dreaming. But amid the excitement, there was also a sense of responsibility. The campaign wasn't just a one-time event. It was a call to action that had ignited a fire, and Marcus wasn't about to let it fizzle out. He couldn't. It was a Monday morning, a week after the event, when Marcus found himself sitting in Ms. Langford's office. The room was quiet, with only the faint hum of the air conditioning in the background. Ms. Langford had invited him for a meeting to discuss the aftermath of the event and the momentum it had gained. "Marcus," Ms. Langford began, her voice calm but filled with a certain urgency. "I've been hearing from a lot of teachers and students. The event was a huge success. But with success comes responsibility. What's next?" Marcus shifted in his seat. It was a question he had been asking himself for days now. The rally had sparked something bigger than he could have anticipated, and now the pressure to keep it going was mounting. But he had no doubt about one thing: he couldn't let the fire die out. Not now. "We keep going," he said firmly. "We start small. We continue what we've begun and make sure people don't forget. It's not enough to have one day of change. We need to have days, weeks, months, years of it. And that starts here, right now." Ms. Langford leaned forward, her eyes narrowed in thought. "You're right, Marcus. The energy around this is powerful. And we want to help sustain it. I've spoken to the administration, and we're looking into ways to integrate these kinds of conversations into the school's curriculum: diversity, inclusion, social justice. But we need students like you to keep pushing for it. You're the ones who will make this stick." Marcus nodded, absorbing her words. The idea of bringing these discussions into the classroom, of making them a regular part of the school's educational experience, was a huge step forward. It was a chance to ensure that what they had started wasn't just a passing trend, but a permanent part of the school culture. But the more he thought about it, the more he realized that this wasn't just about his school. This was something that could have an even wider impact. The conversations they had started weren't just relevant to them, they were relevant to every community across the country. "We can't stop it just here," Marcus said, his voice gaining strength. "We need to take this beyond the school. We need to reach the community, the local businesses, the local leaders. We need to make sure everyone is involved." Ms. Langford raised an eyebrow, impressed by his ambition. "And how do you propose we do that?" "Start by inviting them into the conversation," Marcus replied. "We host community events, town halls, open forums, where people can share their stories. Where people can be heard. And we partner with local organizations and businesses to sponsor these events, to bring in resources that help make them bigger." Ms. Langford smiled, her hands clasped on her desk. "I think you're onto something, Marcus. I'll support you in whatever way I can. And I'll speak to the principal about helping fund some of these initiatives." Marcus felt a surge of pride. This was happening. It wasn't just a school project, it was evolving into something much larger. He had no idea where this would go, but he knew it would be important. He also knew it wouldn't be easy. It would take time, patience, and a lot of hard work. But he was ready. Later that afternoon, Marcus met up with Aidan and Jade to brainstorm ideas for the next phase of the campaign. They sat in the library, the quiet hum of students working around them. It was a welcome contrast to the frenzy of the last few days, but Marcus could feel the weight of their next steps ahead of them. "We need to keep building," Aidan said, his fingers tapping on his notebook. "The rally was a big deal, but it can't be the last time we bring people together. It has to be an ongoing thing. We should do monthly events, like community forums, to keep the conversation alive." "I agree," Jade said, tapping her pen on the table. "But we need to make sure we're also amplifying voices. We should feature guest speakers who can talk about their personal experiences with discrimination, who can really drive the message home. And we can start organizing a mentorship program to connect students with leaders in the community, people who have fought for change, who can teach us how to keep pushing." Marcus smiled, proud of the direction their brainstorming was taking. "That's exactly it. We need to get the community involved, not just as spectators, but as active participants. And we have to keep it going, even when things get tough." The three of them spent the rest of the afternoon sketching out a plan for the next few months. They planned to meet with local organizations, businesses, and the school board to make sure their ideas had support from all corners of the community. They were also planning a series of workshops aimed at educating students and teachers about systemic racism and how to combat it in everyday life. The vision was clear: keep the movement alive, make it a lasting part of the community, and ensure that the conversation never stopped. The next week, they began putting their plan into motion. The first step was organizing a town hall meeting for the local community. It would be an open forum where anyone could come and share their experiences, ask questions, and discuss ideas for how to make their community more inclusive and just. Marcus sent out invitations to local leaders, community members, and even local businesses. He wanted this to be more than just a school event. He wanted it to be a gathering of people from all walks of life, united by the common goal of creating a better, more equitable world. When the day arrived, the town hall was packed. People from all over the community came together in the local high school auditorium, filling every seat. The energy in the room was electric. It was as if the entire town was coming together for the first time to confront the issues they had long ignored. Marcus stood at the front of the room, his heart pounding in his chest. This was it. This was the moment where it all came together. He took a deep breath and stepped up to the podium. "Thank you all for coming," Marcus said, his voice steady but full of emotion. "This is just the beginning. We're here today because we know that change doesn't happen in silence. It happens when we come together and have the tough conversations. When we stand up and demand better, for ourselves, for our families, and for the future." As he spoke, he could feel the room's energy shifting. This wasn't just about one person's campaign anymore. It was about the collective strength of an entire community coming together for something bigger than themselves. And as Marcus looked out over the crowd, he knew one thing for sure: this movement was only getting started. The days following the town hall were a whirlwind. The meeting had been more successful than Marcus had dared to dream, with people from all over the community sharing their thoughts, asking difficult questions, and suggesting practical ways to improve their shared world. But while the event had sparked a sense of hope, it had also unleashed a wave of controversy. News about the meeting spread quickly, first through social media, and then through local newspapers and even radio stations. While many applauded the initiative, there were others who had a much different reaction. Complaints about the tone of the discussions, the focus on race, and the idea that their community might need to change started flooding in. The local paper ran an editorial titled, "The Danger of Dividing Us," and social media platforms were filled with posts criticizing the movement as unnecessary, even accusing the school and Marcus of stirring up conflict where there had been none before. The messages grew louder, more intense, and more personal. Some local businesses pulled their support for future events, and a few of Marcus's classmates, some of whom had initially supported him, began to distance themselves, claiming they felt uncomfortable with how the discussions were framing their community. One evening, as Marcus sat in his room, scrolling through the endless barrage of comments and messages, he felt the weight of the criticism pressing down on him. His phone buzzed with a new notification, a message from his mom. He opened it. "Marcus, I know you're going through a lot right now, but remember why you're doing this. Keep pushing. We're all proud of you. Love, Mom." He read it several times, the words grounding him. His mom had always been his biggest supporter, the one who encouraged him to believe in himself and to keep fighting for what was right, even when it was hard. But he still felt a knot in his stomach. This was harder than he had imagined. His thoughts were interrupted by a knock on the door. "Hey, you doing okay?" Aiden's voice came from the other side. Marcus opened the door, seeing Aiden standing there, looking concerned. "Yeah," Marcus said, trying to sound more confident than he felt. "Just, a lot of messages to go through. It's overwhelming." Aiden walked in and sat on the edge of Marcus's bed. "I get it. People don't like change, especially when it challenges their comfort zones. But that's what we're doing, right? We're challenging things, making people think about stuff they'd rather ignore. The hard part is that we can't make everyone happy. I know, Marcus said, his voice low. But it just feels like we're losing some of the support. The backlash, it's a lot. I know, man, Aiden said, shaking his head. But you're doing something important. Something that's bigger than all of this. People are always going to resist, especially when they're afraid of losing something they think they have. But you're not backing down, right? Marcus hesitated. He felt the pressure of the moment bearing down on him. But looking at Aiden, he realized how much he needed the support of his friends right now. I'm not backing down, Marcus said with quiet determination. But I need help. We all need to stick together on this. Aiden grinned. You've got it. We're in this together, Marcus. We're not going to let a few bad comments stop us from doing what's right. Marcus felt a small sense of relief. His friends had always been there for him, but something about this moment felt different. The movement was no longer just about making a change at school, it was about pushing back against a system that had remained comfortable for too long, even when it came at the expense of so many. It was about shaking things up, and that came with a price. The challenge wasn't in getting people to agree with him, it was about staying strong when the tide of opposition started to rise. The following week, Marcus met with Jade and Aiden to discuss their next steps. They couldn't afford to let the negativity get to them. There was still too much work to do. We need to respond, Marcus said, pacing in the small cafe they were sitting in. But we can't just give in to the people who are angry. We need to show them why this is important. Aiden nodded. Maybe it's time for us to hold another event, something that invites people to sit down and talk, face to face. We could invite the people who have criticized us and get them to engage in real conversations. We can't just let the division grow. Jade smiled. I like that idea. And it's a way to show that we're not here to attack anyone. We just want to listen and understand their concerns, while also making sure they understand ours. We can't force anyone to change their views, but we can invite them into the conversation. Marcus felt a spark of hope as he listened to his friends. They weren't backing down either. They were ready to stand firm, to push forward, and to keep fighting for the change they knew was necessary. I'll call Ms. Langford tomorrow, Marcus said. We need to get the school's backing for this. If we're going to make it work, we need the community to see that we're not about creating more division. We're about bringing people together, even when it's uncomfortable. The following week, they announced the new event, a dialogue for change. It would be an open forum, similar to the town hall, but this time with the goal of bringing together those who had criticized the movement and those who supported it. The format would be structured. There would be time for everyone to share their concerns, their frustrations, and their hopes for the future. The response was mixed. Some people were willing to engage, while others continued to reject the idea outright. But Marcus knew they had to give it a chance. They couldn't let the division tear them apart. They had to take a stand, not just for the people who were already on their side, but for the ones who hadn't yet seen the importance of the movement. The event was scheduled for the following Saturday. When the day arrived, the gymnasium was filled with people from all sides of the debate. It was a tense atmosphere, people weren't just there to listen, they were there to confront each other. But Marcus stood at the front of the room, focused and determined. He knew this was their chance to bring everyone together, to prove that their cause was about more than just one group of people or one community. The first few minutes were awkward, with people on edge. But slowly, the tone began to shift. As Marcus spoke, sharing his experiences and why this movement meant so much to him, others began to open up as well. People who had initially been hostile were now sharing their own fears and concerns. They weren't agreeing with everything, but they were listening. That was a start. By the end of the event, Marcus felt exhausted but hopeful. It hadn't been easy, but it was a step forward, a step toward healing the rifts that had opened in their community. As he left the gym, Aiden and Jade walked alongside him. You did good, man, Aiden said, clapping him on the back. Jade smiled. Yeah, we're not done yet, but today felt like we made real progress. Marcus nodded, feeling the weight of the moment. The storm wasn't over. But he could see a little light through the clouds now, and that was enough for him to keep moving forward. The following week was a blur of emotions. Marcus had hoped the dialogue event would be a turning point, but the real shift came in the days that followed. The reactions to the event were mixed, but one thing was undeniable: the conversation was no longer one-sided. For the first time in weeks, Marcus could see a way forward, a way where change wasn't just a distant idea but a tangible possibility. That Saturday, after the Dialogue for Change event, Marcus sat down with Aidan and Jade in the quiet corner of their favorite coffee shop. They'd all been feeling a mixture of exhaustion and relief. Despite the challenges, despite the tough conversations, they'd pushed through. And they were beginning to see the fruits of their labor. "That was intense," Aidan said, sipping his coffee. "But I think it worked. I mean, people actually listened. We didn't win everyone over, but that was never the point. We got them to think, and that's huge." Jade nodded, looking thoughtful. "I agree. The hardest part was getting people to talk about things they've been avoiding for years. But I think we've opened a door. We can't expect them to suddenly agree with everything, but at least they'll start questioning things. And that's the first step." Marcus sat back in his chair, feeling a deep sense of accomplishment. It wasn't just the success of the event, but the way it had felt, a moment where they'd taken a stand, challenged the status quo, and refused to back down. It had been hard, but it had been worth it. "We did it," Marcus said, his voice quiet but filled with pride. "We showed them we're serious. And we're not going anywhere." As the weeks passed, the movement continued to evolve. The conversations that had begun with one event now stretched into classrooms, community meetings, and local businesses. It wasn't always easy. Some people resisted, still clinging to the idea that things didn't need to change. But there were more who listened, who understood, who were willing to admit that there was work to be done. One of the most significant moments came when the school board approved a proposal to integrate diversity, inclusion, and anti-racism workshops into the curriculum. It wasn't a full solution, but it was a step in the right direction. The workshops would begin the following semester, and Marcus, Aidan, and Jade were invited to help design the curriculum. It felt like their efforts were being validated, and more importantly, the seeds they'd planted were beginning to grow. That evening, as Marcus walked home from school, he felt a weight lifted from his shoulders. It wasn't just the success of the campaign, but the knowledge that they had made a real difference. He had set out to challenge the system, and while the road hadn't been easy, he had learned more about himself, his friends, and his community than he ever thought possible. As he rounded the corner to his house, his phone buzzed. It was a message from his mom. "Marcus, I'm so proud of you. I knew you had it in you. Keep going, no matter what. Love, Mom." A smile tugged at his lips. He hadn't realized just how much he needed her words until now. They meant everything. And they reminded him why he couldn't stop. He opened the door to find his mom sitting at the kitchen table, a cup of tea in front of her. She looked up and smiled as he walked in. "How's everything going?" she asked, her voice soft but full of pride. Marcus pulled out a chair and sat down beside her. "It's going really well, Mom. It's just a lot. But we're making progress. We're getting people to listen. And the school is actually starting to put something in place. It feels like we're on the right track." His mom reached over and gave his hand a gentle squeeze. "You've done something incredible, Marcus. You've started a conversation that needed to happen, and you're making a difference. That's something most people never get to do in their lifetime." He smiled, feeling a swell of emotion. "I couldn't have done it without you, Mom. You've always supported me." "I always will," she said softly. "But this? This is all you. You had the courage to take that first step. You're showing the world what it means to stand up for what's right." The next day, Marcus woke up with a renewed sense of purpose. He knew that the work was far from over, but he also knew that they had achieved something powerful. His phone buzzed with a notification from Aiden. "Hey, ready for our meeting with the school board tomorrow? We've got work to do, but we're doing it together." Marcus smiled and typed back a quick reply, "Always ready. Let's make this count." He looked around his room, the walls filled with posters of his favorite music artists, sports teams, and books. His world felt the same in some ways, but it had changed in others. He was no longer just a student. He was a catalyst for change. He knew there would be more challenges ahead, more people who would resist, more moments when he would feel overwhelmed, but he was ready. They were ready. A few months later, Marcus stood in front of the school board, his friends by his side. The room was filled with local leaders, parents, and teachers, all there to hear about the impact of the movement. Marcus took a deep breath and stepped up to the microphone. He looked around the room, meeting the eyes of people who had once questioned his motives, who had once doubted whether a teenager could really make a difference. "Well, here we are," Marcus began, his voice steady. "We're not done yet. But what we've started is something real. It's not about us. It's about everyone, about every student, every teacher, every member of this community. We've begun a conversation. We've started to change the narrative. And it's just the beginning." He paused, letting his words sink in. Change isn't easy, but it's necessary. And together, we can make it happen. The room was silent for a moment before a round of applause broke out. It was loud, enthusiastic, and filled with hope. For the first time in a long while, Marcus felt like he was part of something much bigger than himself. The ripple effect had begun, and it was only going to keep spreading. As Marcus stood there, his heart swelling with pride, he knew one thing for certain: this was just the beginning. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough?